Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione were crowned the true heirs of Merlin? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Hawthorn Hour. The fourth floor corridor went cold an hour before the rest of the castle, which was precisely why Harry liked it. The torches burned lower here. The tapestry of Marithel the Patient hung between two windows that looked out on the lake, and behind it, if you knew to lean your shoulder against the stone and push, there was a stairwell that went nowhere and a window seat the size of a small bed, tucked into a niche the architects seemed to have forgotten. Hermione had found it in October, chasing a draft she swore was hiding a passage. The passage turned out to be a dead end. The window seat turned out to be theirs. He got there first that evening, as he usually did. He had learned that if he waited for her at the library doors, she would be carrying too many books to wave, and would instead lift her chin at him in a manner that Ron called bossy and Harry privately thought of as a greeting in its own language. So he went ahead, climbed in behind the tapestry, and set out the things. The chipped blue teacup, which Hermione had brought from her parents' kitchen at the start of term, and refused to explain beyond saying it was hers. The tin of biscuits Mrs. Weasley had sent. A candle stub he lit with a tap of his wand, and a word that still felt like a small theft every time it worked, because magic that obeyed him was a thing he had owned for 1 year after 11 years of owning nothing, and the newness of it had not worn off, and he hoped it never would. Marithel watched him from her threads with the long-suffering look of a woman who had been waiting in that corridor for 4 centuries and intended to wait 4 more. Harry nodded to her. He had got into the habit. It seemed rude not to. He sat with the warmth of the candle on his hands and let the quiet be the good kind. There were 2 kinds he had worked out. At the Dursleys, the quiet had been a held breath waiting to become a shout, the pause before the cupboard door, the listening you did when you were small and the house was deciding what mood to be in. This quiet was different. This was the quiet of a place that did not mind you. He had spent a great deal of the last year learning to tell the two apart, and the window seat was where he came to practice. Hermione came through the gap at 8:15, hair frizzed from the dry air of the library, 3 books under one arm and a 4th held open against her chest with one finger marking the page. She did not say hello. She said, "Did you know there's almost nothing about him, almost nothing real." About who? Merlin. She dropped into the seat across from him, books sliding into the well between them, and reached for the blue cup without looking, the way you reach for something you trust to be there. He had filled it from the flask already. She drank, made a face at the temperature, drank again. "We use his name for everything. Merlin's beard, Order of Merlin, Merlin's pants, which I will never understand the appeal of. And then you go to find out who he actually was, and it's all." She flicked the open book with the backs of her fingers. "Stories. He turned a king into a fish. He slept under a hill. He was a Slytherin, which is the only fact anyone agrees on, and even that's only because his portrait used to hang in their common room before it walked out of the frame 600 years ago and never came back. It walked out, that's what the footnote says." She found the place and read it to him, her voice dropping into the careful flatness she used for quoting, as though she could keep the words honest by refusing to perform them. "The likeness of Meodin Wilt, last seen in the Founders' Hall in the reign of Henry VI, departed its frame and was not recovered. The frame is preserved. That's it. That's all of it. A man we name our highest honor after, and the most we can say is that even his painting got tired of us and left." Harry turned that over while he broke a biscuit in 2 and gave her the larger half, because that was how it went. She always took the smaller, and he had learned to correct for it in advance. Outside, the lake had gone the color of pewter. A first-year's shout carried up faintly from the grounds and was swallowed by the dark. "Why are you reading about Merlin?" he asked. "We've got the switching spell essay." "I finished the switching spell essay." "Of course you did. And I started thinking about it in bins this morning because he said the Order of Merlin in that voice he uses, you know, the one where you can tell even he's stopped listening to himself, and I thought, we don't actually know anything about the most important wizard who ever lived, and nobody seems to mind." She set the book down and pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them, chin on top, looking at him over the rim of the blue cup she had not let go of. "Doesn't that bother you, that we just decided he was the greatest and then stopped checking?" This was the thing about Hermione that the rest of the school did not see, because the rest of the school stopped at the raised hand and the perfect marks and her knack for making a third year feel like an idiot for misremembering a date. They did not see that she asked questions the way other people picked at scabs, compulsively, because the not knowing genuinely hurt her, a splinter under the skin of the world. Harry had not understood it either the first weeks. He understood it now. He had watched her sit up past midnight with a problem, as he had once lain awake in a cupboard listening for footsteps, because some things you could not put down until you had made them safe. "It bothers you," he said. "That's enough for me." She rolled her eyes, but she was pleased, he could tell, the corner of her mouth doing the thing it did. "That's not an argument. It's loyalty. It's better than an argument. It really isn't." "We'll find out," he said, and meant it lightly, the way you say a thing to close a conversation. but the words came out heavier than he intended, settling into the cold air with a weight he had not asked them to carry, and Marithil's tapestry stirred on the wall though there was no draft, the threads breathing once and going still. They both looked at it. "That's been doing that," Hermione said quietly. "All week, I keep telling myself it's the wind in the stairwell." She did not sound like she believed it. She sounded like a person reading a footnote she did not want to be true. Harry had felt it too. He had not said so because there was nothing to say, only a sense he had been carrying since the start of October, the memory of a sound that woke you without knowing what it was. The castle had begun to feel to him like a room where someone had just stopped speaking. He would round a corner and the silence would have a shape to it, an attention. Twice he had put his hand flat against a wall for no reason he could name and felt the stone warm under his palm, friendly like a dog leaning into a touch. He had told no one, he had barely told himself. "It's probably the wind," he said. "You don't believe that either." "No," he admitted, "I don't." She set the cup down. When Hermione decided to take something seriously, you could watch it happen, a settling, a lining up of all her considerable forces toward a single point. She reached into the well of the seat and came up with the book again, but she did not open it. She held it in both hands and looked at him with the particular directness that had frightened him a little once and that he now thought of as the truest thing about her. "In first year," she said, "when the troll, you came back for me. Hermione, let me, I've never properly said it." Her thumb moved along the spine of the book. "Everyone else heard the warning and they went where they were told. You heard it and you came to find me in the one place I was because you knew I didn't know. Nobody had ever done that, worked out where I'd be because they were thinking about me at all." She lifted her chin, daring him to make it small. "I said something to you after in the hospital corridor. Do you remember what I said?" He did. He had thought about it more than he would ever tell her. "You said, 'I'll figure it out. You hold the line.' I'd been thinking about it ever since. About how it works, the two of us. You stand in the doorway and I find the way through. I'm not frightened when you're between me and the thing. I've never not been frightened before." She said it plainly, a fact among facts, no performance, and that was worse and better than if she had wept. "I don't have words for what that is. Best friend isn't big enough. There should be a word." "Mind and heart," Harry said. It came to him whole, the way the right thing sometimes does, and the moment it left his mouth the candle stub flared. Not guttered, flared, white at the wick, throwing their two shadows enormous up the curved wall of the dead stairwell, and the warmth he had felt in the stones came up through the seat beneath them both at once. A low single note he heard in his teeth more than his ears. A chord struck somewhere very far down in the foundations of the world and held. Hermione's hand found his across the books. She was not frightened, he could feel that she was not. Whatever was waking, it had her full and ferocious attention, and her grip said only one thing, the thing it always said, which was that wherever this went they were going together or not at all. The note faded, the candle steadied, the stones cooled. They sat with their hands clasped over a book about a man whose portrait had walked away, and neither of them let go for a long time. That, Hermione said at last, very precisely, was not the wind. Morning in the great hall was loud in the way Harry had come to need. 4 long tables of clatter and post-owls and the smell of porridge, and the ceiling doing something gray and undecided with November cloud. Ron dropped onto the bench beside him with the easy weight of someone who had never once doubted he belonged at a table, and took half the toast without asking, which was its own kind of welcome. "Chess after," he said through it. "I've worked out what you keep doing with your knights. It's tragic, mate. Genuinely, it's a strategy. It's a cry for help." Ron jabbed his fork at Hermione, who had her ancient runes text open against the milk jug and was reading it the way other people ate. "She's at it again, Hermione. It's breakfast. The food goes in the mouth, not the brain." "I can do both," Hermione said, not looking up, and turned a page with one buttered finger, and Ron caught Harry's eye and grinned, and for that moment the three of them were exactly what the rest of the school thought they were, the famous one, the funny one, the clever one, and nothing underneath. But there was something underneath now, and Harry could feel it sitting between him and Hermione like a third cup at the table that only the two of them could see. Twice that morning she had looked up from her runes and met his eyes across the toast and held them a beat too long, and twice he had known exactly what she was thinking without a word passing, which had happened before plenty of times, except that now there was a warmth banked under his breastbone that warmed a little each time, like a cold-breathed dawn. Ron talked about the cannons. Harry made the right noises. Under the table his right hand stayed loosely closed, and when Hermione's sleeve brushed his arm reaching for the marmalade, the silver under his skin, invisible to the whole bright hall, gave a single answering pulse. "You two are weird this week," Ron said. He said it lightly, the way you say a thing you half mean. "You keep going quiet at the same time. It's like watching twins." "We're working on something," Hermione said, which was true and told him nothing, and Harry watched a flicker go across Ron's face, there and gone, the flicker of a boy with 5 older brothers who had spent his life arriving at things that were already shared. Ron covered it with toast. But Harry saw it, and a part of him that had learned in a cupboard to read the weather of other people's moods made a quiet note to be careful, because the secret they were keeping was the kind that built a wall, and the first person it would wall out was the one who had been there since the train. After exams, Harry said. We'll show you, promise. Show me what? Don't know yet, Harry said honestly, and Ron laughed and let it go, and the porridge went round, and overhead the enchanted ceiling cleared without warning to a square of impossible blue, just above the Gryffindor table. Just for a moment, the castle glancing down at the three of them and unable quite to help itself. No one else looked up. Harry did, so did Hermione. They had already started without deciding to, keeping the list of things only they had seen. It took them 11 days to find the door. They were not at first looking for a door. They were looking for the Founder's Hall, the room the footnote had named, where Merlin's frame supposedly still hung. No such room appeared on any map they could find, and the one map Harry could not show her without explaining how he had it stayed folded in his trunk while his conscience argued with itself. He gave in on the third night. Keeping a second secret from her had begun to feel like a small betrayal of the first, and so he laid the blank parchment on the window seat and touched his wand to it and said the words and watched her face as the ink bloomed. Hermione turned the Marauder's map over in her hands, reading the silver lettering inside the border, the footprints walking their tiny labeled walks. Someone made this, she said softly, for you, or for people like you. She understood exactly how much that mattered to a boy who had owned nothing, and she did not say any of it, only pressed her thumb once against the corner where Filch was pacing his office 2 floors down and handed it back and said, "Right, show me everywhere it doesn't go." That was the key she found, the way Hermione always found the key, by asking the question backward. The map showed the castle the makers had known. It did not show the places the castle kept to itself. So they hunted the seams, the corridors where the map went vague, the staircases that arrived in the wrong place, and Harry felt the warm pull under his feet, and where the pull and the map disagreed, the pull was always right. She hated that. She loved that she hated it. "You're navigating by feelings," she whispered on the 7th night, scandalized and delighted, as the pull tugged them past a staircase the map wanted and toward one that, when they took it, set them down 3 floors lower in a gallery of armor neither of them had seen. "This is no way to conduct an investigation. It's working. That's what makes it unbearable." But she kept her hand in the crook of his elbow the whole way, and when a portrait stirred in its sleep and they froze together under the cloak, 2 bodies holding one breath, he felt the silver in their joined skins go quiet and dim, hiding them, and he understood without being told that the mark was not only a brand. It had begun, very gently, to teach them how to use it, the way a fire teaches a cold hand by being warm. On the 9th night Peeves nearly had them, swooping the length of a corridor, shrieking about students out of bed, and they pressed into an alcove and the torches along the whole passage guttered out of their own accord, dropping the corridor into a dark that sent the poltergeist howling off toward easier sport. Hermione stared at the dead torches afterward with the stillness that meant she was rebuilding her entire understanding of something. "It put out its own lights to hide us," she breathed. "Harry. Do you understand how much intent that takes? Castles don't have intent, wards don't choose." She did not sleep that night. He knew because he passed her a note at breakfast, folded small the way they had started doing, and got it back in the same lesson with 3 theories crowded into the margin in her cramped hand, each one crossed out and underlined twice at the bottom. "It knows us. It has decided. We are in this now whether we like it or not." He kept that note. He kept all of them. There was a cost to the keeping, and Harry felt it most at the edges of ordinary days. In the common room, Ron set up the chessboard and Harry sat across from it with half his mind 2 floors down in a hall full of stars, and lost 3 games he should have drawn, and saw Ron's face do the puzzled thing again, the thing that asked, without asking, where his friend had gone. Hermione sat in the window of the tower with a book open and unread, marked hand curled in her lap, watching the grounds the way you watch a road you are about to be sent down. Twice Harry began to tell Ron, the words right there behind his teeth, and twice he heard the dry old voice from the hall, "Let no single soul take up what wants for 2, and understood it was not only the throne the warning guarded. Some things, told too soon, became weapons in the wrong hands by no fault of the hands. So he played another game and lost it too, and promised himself again that when they knew enough to make it safe, Ron would be the first, because Ron had been the first at everything that mattered, and a debt like that did not stop being owed just because you had gone quiet for a season. On the 11th evening, the pull took them down a service stair behind a suit of armor that Filch swore at regularly, along a passage that smelled of cold iron and older water, to a stretch of wall that was not a wall. It was a door. It was so plainly a door that Harry could not understand how they had walked the corridor 3 times that term without seeing it. Oak banded in iron gone black with age, set in a frame of pale wood carved all over with leaves, and the leaves were hawthorn. He knew them from the hedges at Privet Drive, the deep lobes, the suggestion of thorns. There was no handle. There was no keyhole. There was set at the center where the 2 leaves of the door met, a single iron boss in the shape of a closed hand. Hermione had her wand out before he did. "Alohomora," she said. The door did nothing. She tried 6 more spells, each more obscure than the last, the kind she read in books Harry had never heard of, and the door received all of them with the patience of a thing that had refused better wizards than them. She stepped back, breathing through her nose, which was what she did instead of swearing. It's not locked, she said. Locked things resist you. This isn't resisting, it's just not interested. Harry put his hand on the iron fist. He did not decide to. His arm did it the way your arm reaches for something falling. The metal was cold and then it was warm, that same friendliness, the dog leaning in, and under his palm he felt the boss turn, the iron fingers uncurling against his skin, and the door breathed out a thread of air that smelled green and wet and 1,000 years old. It did not open. Harry, Hermione's voice had gone very level. Look at your hand, now look at mine. Across the back of his hand, where it pressed the iron, faint lines of silver had risen under the skin, branching, the pattern of a leaf or a river or the veins of a leaf, which are the same thing. The same lines stood on the back of hers, where she had laid it without his seeing on the pale carved frame. They were not the same pattern. His ran like roots, hers ran like the fine arteries of a wing. And where the door's two leaves met, the carved hawthorn had begun, very slowly, to flower, white buds opening along the grain in the dark. Together, she said, it was not a question. She had already understood it as she understood everything 3 seconds before the rest of the world. It opens for two. Put your other hand on the frame. I'll take the fist. They changed places without letting go of the door, an awkward shuffle in the cramped passage, his shoulder against hers, and when her hand closed over the iron fingers and his pressed flat to the flowering wood, the silver in their skin reached across the seam between them and met. The door opened inward onto the dark, and the dark was not empty. A hall lay beyond it, long and low and roofed in stone ribs that vanished upward past the reach of the light, and the light came from a hearth at the far end where a fire burned without wood and without heat, white silver, the color of the lines in their hands, standing up out of a basin of black stone in a single unwavering tongue of flame. Around the hearth the floor had been worked in a great ring of inlay, silver and slate, and the ring was a circle of words in a script Harry could not read, and Hermione, beside him, breathed in sharply because she could read just enough to know she should not have been able to. 2 seats faced each other across the cold fire. They were not thrones. They were plain stone worn smooth, the seats of people who had sat in them often and long, and that plainness was somehow more than any gold could have been, because it meant the room had been lived in by someone who came here not to be seen but to think. Dust lay over none of it. That was the thing Harry could not get past, standing on the threshold with the silver cooling in his hand. A room sealed 1,000 years and there was no dust, the place swept that morning by hands that were not there, kept all this time ready, for someone the castle had been waiting to bring. They stepped in together. The door swung gently to behind them, the hawthorn along its inner face still opening, and the passage they had come from was simply gone, replaced by more of the low stone hall, so that there was no longer any outside, only the fire and the ring and the 2 worn seats. Don't touch anything, Hermione said, and then, because she was honest even with herself, I'm going to touch something, I have to, but not yet. They walked the ring of words. Hermione read aloud the fragments she could catch, her finger hovering an inch above the silver, never landing. The language slid under his attention like fish under ice, there and gone, but here and there a phrase surfaced into something he could almost hold. Not the strong hand, but the joined hand, she murmured. That what one would seize, two may keep. She stopped where the ring closed at the foot of the inlay and went still in the way that meant she had found the sentence the others had been leading to. Read it, Harry said. Here ends the seeking, Hermione read. Not by blood, by the binding of 2 who are one, heart that will not leave, mind that will not rest. Let the hearth know them, and what was Merlin's pass to their hands, and let no single soul take up what wants for 2, lest it burn them hollow. Her finger trembled above the last word. Harry, this isn't a room, it's a will. He left a will, and it isn't written to a son or a grandson, it's written to pair, a heart and a mind, 2 who are one. He left everything he was to 2 people who would love each other enough to be trusted with it, and he sealed it so that no one could take it alone, no matter how strong, because alone it would burn them hollow. The hearth at the far end of the hall leaned toward them. There was no other word for it. The single tongue of cold flame, which had not so much as wavered, bent in the air, reaching down the length of the hall toward the 2 of them, and the silver in their hands answered it, brightening, pulling, the roots in his skin and the wings in her straining toward the fire and toward each other. It wants us to come closer, Harry said. It wants us to sit. Hermione's voice shook and held both at once. Those are the seats. If the words are true, if it really does burn you hollow alone, then we can't do this one at a time. If only one of us sits, then both of us sit, he said, or neither, mind and heart. She took his hand. The silver leapt between their palms and ran up their wrists in a single shared branching, his roots into her wings, hers into his, until he could not have said where his skin ended, and they crossed the hall together and turned, and sat down at the same moment in the 2 worn seats that faced each other across the white fire. The hall woke. It came up through the stone, the chord he had felt under the window seat, vast now, a sound with no top and no bottom, the note the world would make if you struck it like a bell. The cold fire flowered the way the door had flowered, opening from one tongue into a tree of light that filled the hearth, and then the hall, silver-white branches climbing the stone ribs to a roof that was suddenly very far away and full of stars that had no business being underground. Harry felt the castle above him, all of it, thousands of tons of stone and centuries of magic, turn its attention down through floor after floor to the hall where two 13-year-olds sat in the seats of a dead king, and he felt it know them. It was not like the sorting. The sorting had reached into him and taken a measure and named him. This did not measure. This recognized the way you are recognized by someone who has loved you your whole life and only now come home, a flood of welcome so total that Harry, who had spent 11 years in a cupboard being told he was nothing and 1 year being told he was a legend and had believed neither, sat in the seat of Merlin with white fire in his veins and understood all at once that he was wanted, that they both were. That this had been kept ready 1,000 years not for a hero and not for a tool but for two people who would choose each other, and that the castle had been holding the door for them since the night they were born. Across the fire Hermione was weeping without any sound, chin up, refusing to look away from it, cataloging her own astonishment even as it broke over her, and he loved her then with a clarity that had nothing in it the school would have understood, nothing that needed a different word after all, only this, that he would sit in any fire as long as she was in the other seat, and that she had crossed the hall holding his hand rather than reach the throne alone. Then the fire asked its question. It did not use words at first, it used the thing each of them most wanted and had learned to live without. Harry felt the white light part in front of him like a curtain drawn from a window, and through it he saw not the hall but a version of himself standing alone in it, older, taller, the silver running all the way up both arms and into the throat, and around that other Harry the castle bent and the world bent, and nothing in it could ever hurt him again, no fist, no cupboard, no green light, because he had taken the whole of it into himself, and there was no one left who could reach him. The vision was warm, it was the warmest thing the fire had shown him. It offered him very gently the one thing 11 years under a staircase had taught him to crave above food, above love, above his own dead parents' faces, safety that depended on no one but himself. Take it alone, the fire said, below words. You need never be small again. You need never wait at a door for anyone. And across the cold flame he heard Hermione make a sound, and knew the fire was showing her the same shape of her own hunger, the answer to every question, the end of every splinter under the skin, all of it certain and complete in hers, if she would only reach for it without him, alone in a tower of perfect knowing where nothing was ever unsure again. Harry looked through his curtain of warm light at the other Harry, the safe one, the untouchable one, and understood three things in the space of a single struck note. The first was that the vision was true, that the power really was that great. The second was that the other Harry in the vision had no one in the second seat. The fire had been honest with him, that to hold the whole of it alone you sent the other seat away. And the third thing, which arrived not as a thought but as a refusal already made in his hands before his head caught up, was that he would rather be small at a door with her than untouchable in an empty hall. No, he said, to the warmest thing he had ever been offered, not without her. The curtain shook. He found Hermione's eyes through the parting fire and saw that she had already turned from her own tower, that she was watching him refuse his, that they had arrived at the same word at the same moment the way they arrived at everything, and she said it too, clear and unafraid. No, not without him. The fire that had offered them each a kingdom of one heard itself answered and stopped tempting and began instead to bind. Voice came then, or the memory of a voice, dry and amused and impossibly old, threaded through the cord so that he felt it in the marrow rather than the ear. So it said, the way a man says a thing he has waited a long while to be proven right about. Two who offered everything alone choose each other instead. That is the whole of the lock, children. Not your blood, which is nothing, and not your power, which is borrowed, but only this, that when the fire showed you the throne with one seat, you both said no. Keep saying it. It is the only thing that has ever kept this safe. The light gathered. It did not fade so much as fold, drawing back into the hearth, into the single tongue of flame, but it left something behind in each of them, a warmth banked low under the breastbone like the candle stub on the window seat, his to carry now, theirs. The stars went out of the roof. The hall was a hall again, low and plain, the two worn seats, the ring of words made whole where it had seemed broken, and Harry understood that the breaking and the mending had been the asking and the answer. On the back of his right hand the silver had not faded. It had set the way a scar sets, fine pale lines under the skin, roots reaching toward the wrist. He looked across at Hermione and knew, without asking, that the wing veins stood on hers to match, and that no one else would ever quite be able to see them, and that she would be able to see his in the dark. We can't tell anyone, she said. Her voice was wrecked and steady. Not yet, not Ron, not Professor McGonagall, not the headmaster, not until we understand it. Harry, a muggle born and an orphan, just inherited Merlin. Do you understand what people will do? To take it or stop it or use it, we have to know what we're holding before anyone knows we're holding it. Agreed, Harry said. He found he could think clearly here in this place that had been made for thinking. We learn it first, we tell no one, and if anyone has to know, we decide together every time. Promise me that part, not the secret, the together. The together, she said, always the together. She wiped her face with the heel of her marked hand, leaving a faint silver smear that only he could see. Mind and heart, mind and heart. The hawthorn door opened for them from the inside without being touched, onto the cold passage in the suit of armor in the ordinary castle, and as they climbed back toward Gryffindor Tower in a silence too full for talking, Harry kept his marked hand in his pocket, closed around the warmth banked there now, and did not let go of it or of her sleeve the whole way up. In the round office at the top of the spiral stair, a great many silver instruments stopped working at once. Albus Dumbledore had been awake, as he often was at that hour, sitting with a cup of tea gone cold and a letter he did not intend to answer, when the soft chorus of whirrings and tickings that filled the shelves of his office fell altogether silent. He sat very still. He had not heard them stop in 50 years. Some of them had not stopped in 500. He rose and went among them. The little instrument of spun gold that tracked the wards of the castle, that had ticked out the slow heartbeat of Hogwarts since before his own apprenticeship, had simply ceased. Its single fine needle swung all the way across its dial, and resting now, trembling against a mark engraved at the very edge that he had been told as a young man by a master older than he was now would never be reached. The mark had no name. The master had called it, with a laugh that had not been entirely a laugh, the homecoming. Dumbledore stood before the stilled instrument a long while. On the perch by the window, Fawkes shifted and made a sound that was not quite song. Yes, Dumbledore said to him, I felt it too. He had spent a long life keeping a great many forces in a careful balance, the way a man keeps a tower of cups from falling, by attention, by patience, by knowing where each weight wanted to go before it went there. He had thought he knew every weight in the castle. He had built much of his life's work on knowing them. And now something had woken under the foundations that was older than the balance, older than the school in some sense, that made the school its house and not the other way round, and it had woken not for him, who had served this place faithfully for the better part of a century, but for someone else. He thought of a boy with green eyes and an untidy scar, who carried a piece of an enemy in his head and a prophecy on his shoulders, and who would have to be guided, gently and firmly and without ever quite being told why, toward a thing Dumbledore had not yet found the courage to name even to himself. He had a plan for that boy. It was a good plan. It was a kind plan, by the standards of the cruelty it was meant to prevent. It depended in every part on Harry trusting him, and on Dumbledore knowing more than Harry did about every door. The needle trembled against the homecoming, and Dumbledore understood that somewhere below him a door had opened that he did not have the key to, and that whatever lay behind it had not asked his leave. Find out, he said softly to the room, to the long habit of his own vigilance. Carefully, kindly, but find out. He returned to his chair and his cold tea, and he did not sleep, and the instruments did not tick again until dawn, and when they resumed they ran a little differently than before, as though the heart of the castle had learned a second beat in the night and meant to keep it. 2 floors below the Gryffindor dormitories, Harry lay awake on top of his blankets with his marked hand held up against the gray square of the window. In the dark the silver showed, faint as frost, roots reaching toward his wrist, and he turned the hand and watched the lines catch what little light there was, and thought about a hall with no dust in it, and a fire that had leaned toward him, and a will written by a man 1,000 years dead to 2 children who had not yet been born, telling them they were wanted. Ron snored in the next bed. Somewhere below, the castle ticked its new second beat, too low for any of them to hear. Harry could feel it anyway, the warmth banked under his breastbone, and he found that he was not afraid, which surprised him, because there was a great deal now to be afraid of, and he could name almost none of it yet. What he felt instead was the thing Hermione had not been able to find a word for, on the window seat with the candle flaring. There should be a word, she had said. He thought perhaps there was, and that it was not a grand one, not heir or king or legend. None of the words the morning would start trying to fasten to them. The word was that across a cold fire in the dark under the castle she had reached for his hand before she reached for a throne, and he had let her, and they had sat down at the same moment together, because neither of them had ever once considered doing it any other way. He closed his marked hand around the warmth and held it, the way you hold the first true thing you have ever owned, and at last, near morning, he slept. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The weighing of names. By the second week of December the alcove behind Marithel had become a laboratory, which was Hermione's word for it, and a hideout, which was Harry's, and both were true. She had brought a slate and a stick of chalk so that nothing they reasoned would have to live on paper that could be found. She had brought the blue cup and a second cup, plain and white, because there were 2 of them now in everything, and she had decided the table should admit it. She had brought a list, of course. The list was titled in her smallest hand, Things We Know, and below it longer, Things We Don't, and the second list grew faster than the first, which she said was the only honest way to do it. She had rules for the alcove now, the rules of a careful mind handling a thing it did not understand. They tested one variable at a time. They wrote nothing down that could not be burned. They assumed always that they were wrong about the mark until it proved them right, because a clever person who assumed she was right, Hermione said, was just a fool with a vocabulary. Harry had laughed at that the first time and then watched her live by it, watched her throw away 3 good theories in a week because the evidence would not quite hold them, and had understood that this was a kind of courage the school never gave marks for, the willingness to be wrong on purpose out loud in front of the one person whose good opinion she actually wanted. "Test it again," she said. "Same as yesterday. I want to see if the range has changed." Harry put down the blue cup and held out his marked hand, and Hermione walked to the far end of the dead stairwell, 12 steps, 14, until she stood at the turn where the stone went dark. "Now," she said, and he thought of her not hard, just turned his attention toward her the way you turn toward a voice, and the silver roots under his skin warmed and brightened, and at the dark turn of the stair Hermione lifted her own hand and he knew, without seeing it, that the wing veins had answered. "Brighter," she called softly, "and sooner. Yesterday there was a lag, today there's none." She came back into the candlelight, writing on the slate as she walked, which she could do without looking, a trick that had unsettled 3 years of classmates. "It's learning us, or we're learning it. The mark isn't a fixed thing, Harry, it's a muscle, and it's getting stronger every day we use it, which means," she underlined something, "which means it gets stronger whether or not we understand it, and that frightens me more than if it just sat there being mysterious. Power that grows on its own and doesn't wait for you to be ready is exactly the kind of thing that gets children killed. We're being careful. We're being careful with a thing we can't measure. That isn't the same as safe." She set the chalk down and wrapped both hands round the white cup. "But I'd rather have it than not. I keep checking myself for whether that's true, and it keeps being true. Yesterday in Charms I was so far ahead of Flitwick's lesson it was almost boring, and then I thought about the hall and the boring went away. I don't want it to go away. Is that wrong?" "No," Harry said. He understood it precisely. The mark had not only changed what he could do. It had changed the shape of the days, given the gray hours a center, the way a candle gives a dark room a place to look. "It's the opposite of the cupboard, that's all. You spent your life being told you were too much, and I spent mine being told I was nothing, and the hall looked at both of us and said it had been waiting. Of course we don't want that to go away." She looked at him for a moment over the white cup. "You do that," she said. "You say the thing I've been circling for an hour in one sentence, and you don't even know it's clever. It's not clever, it's just true. Those are the same thing when you do it." She picked the chalk back up before he could answer, which was how she ended conversations that had got too warm to look at directly, and wrote a new line under things we don't. He leaned to read it. It said, "Who else can feel that the castle changed?" The answer to her question arrived 4 days later in the form of a folded note delivered by a school owl at breakfast, written in a slanting, generous hand Harry had seen once before on the bottom of his very first Hogwarts letter. It requested, with great courtesy and no possibility of refusal, the pleasure of Mr. Potter's company that evening, and mentioned that the password was sherbet lemon, and that there would be a fire and a pot of very good cocoa. Hermione read it upside down across the table and went still. "He never invites you to anything," she said under the clatter. "Not once all year, and the week after the hall wakes there's cocoa." She passed the note back. "Harry, whatever he asks you, you don't know anything, you found nothing, you feel nothing, you're a boy who lost his parents and likes the quiet. Give him that boy, don't give him you. He's the headmaster, Hermione, he's on our side. He's on a side," she said. "I've read about him for a year and a half. He's the greatest wizard alive, and he beat Grindelwald, and everyone who's ever met him says the same thing, that you walk out feeling you've been helped and it takes you a week to notice you also gave him exactly what he wanted. I'm not saying he's bad, I'm saying he's a current, and you don't argue with a current, you just decide ahead of time how far you'll let it carry you." She held his eyes. "Decide now, not in the room is his." So Harry decided in the corridor outside, standing before the stone gargoyle with the password on his tongue, and what he decided was the thing they had promised each other in the hall, together, every time. He would not lie to Dumbledore. He would simply be a door that opened for two, and tonight there was only one of him in the room. The office was warm and golden and full of the soft machine chatter of 100 silver instruments, and Harry, stepping into it, felt the warmth banked under his breastbone go quiet and watchful, the mark dimming itself the way it had in the corridors, hiding. He had not asked it to. He noted that it had known to. Harry. Dumbledore rose from behind the great desk, and his welcome was a real thing. You could not have called it false, the blue eyes crinkling above the half-moon spectacles, a hand extended toward the chair and the cocoa as toward a grandson home from a long journey. "Thank you for indulging an old man's whim. Sit, sit. The marshmallows are Fox's idea. He has opinions about cocoa that I have learned not to question." The phoenix on its perch regarded Harry with one bright black eye and made the low sound that was not quite song, and Harry had the disquieting sense of being weighed by something far older and kinder than its master. "You wanted to see me, sir," Harry said, taking the chair, taking the cocoa, holding it without drinking. "I wanted to see how you are." Dumbledore settled opposite, lacing his long fingers. "It is a thing I do not do often enough and ought to do more." "You have had a strange little life, Harry, stranger than most here understand, and I find myself lately thinking about you. Tell me, have you been sleeping well?" "Well enough, sir." Dumbledore sipped his cocoa. "When I was young, I slept badly in this castle. It is an old place, and old places dream, and a sensitive child can sometimes catch the edge of those dreams without knowing what he has caught. I wondered whether you might have noticed anything of the kind, a restlessness in the stones." A sense that the school has been lately a little more awake than usual. He said it lightly, looking into his cup, and the lightness was the most dangerous thing in the room. I ask because I have noticed it myself, and at my age it is a comfort to learn one is not imagining things. There it was. Hermione had drawn the shape of this moment on the slate and rubbed it out, and here it was in the warm gold light, the current reaching for him, so gentle you would mistake it for the floor. Harry looked into his own cocoa and gave the headmaster the unremarkable second year they had agreed on. I sleep in a tower full of snoring, he said. I don't notice much except Ron is something wrong with the castle, sir. It was not a lie. He had answered a question with a question the way Hermione fenced, and he watched the old man register the move, a flicker behind the spectacles, there and gone, the recognition of one careful person by another. Something in Dumbledore's face changed, warmed, and grew, underneath the warmth, more attentive, the steel showing through the wool for half a second before the wool came back. Nothing is wrong, Dumbledore said. Something is perhaps different. I have been headmaster a long time, Harry. I have grown used to knowing where every door in this castle leads, which is a foolish thing to grow used to, because a castle this old keeps doors even from those who love it. Recently I have had the sense that one of those doors has been opened after a very long time shut, and I confess it has made me curious and a little afraid. He set down his cup. Curiosity and fear are an old man's vices, forgive me them. If you should ever find such a door, Harry, I hope you would come to me, not because I would take it from you. Because some doors open onto things that are too heavy for one person to carry, and I have carried heavy things, and I would not wish to see a child crushed under a weight he did not know to fear. It was, Harry understood, a genuinely kind thing to say, and a genuinely true one, and also a hook with a worm on it, and all three at once, and that was the whole of him in a single sentence. He thought of the inscription, "Let no single soul take up what wants for two." He thought of how badly he wanted, in that warm golden room, to set down the cocoa and tell this tired, kind, powerful old wizard everything, and let someone older carry it. The wanting was real, that was what made it dangerous. "I'd come to you, sir," Harry said, and meant the courtesy and not the promise, and saw Dumbledore hear the difference and choose, for tonight, to let it pass. They talked of other things after that, of Quidditch and of Harry's father, who had also played Seeker, and Dumbledore told a story about James and a suit of armor that made Harry laugh despite everything. And by the time he left, an hour later, full of cocoa and old warmth, he understood exactly what Hermione had warned him of, because he was halfway down the moving stair before he realized he felt wonderful, and that feeling wonderful was precisely the residue the current left behind. He stopped on the step, he turned the hour over. He had given away nothing, he was almost sure. Almost. He went to find Hermione and tell her the almost, because the almost was the kind of thing you did not get to decide alone. They could not go to Gringotts from school, and so they went from London, and the going was its own discovery, because it required Harry to spend 4 days of the Christmas holidays at the Grangers' house, and Harry had not known, until he stood in their narrow bright hall with his bag and a borrowed scarf, that an ordinary family could be like that. Hermione's parents were dentists, and the house smelled of cinnamon and mint and wood smoke, and there was a cat that hated everyone equally, and a kitchen where Mrs. Granger asked Harry 3 questions about himself, and listened to all 3 answers, which was 3 more than he had been asked in any December of his life. He slept in a spare room with a real bed and a window that looked onto a garden, and on the first night he lay awake not from worry but from the strangeness of being somewhere that ran on warmth instead of fear, and he understood a little more about Hermione, about where the fierceness came from, that you could only insist the world ought to be fair if someone had once shown you it could be. "They like you," Hermione said on the second morning, buttering toast in the cinnamon kitchen while her parents argued amiably about a crossword in the next room. "Dad's already deciding you're his project. He'll teach you chess. You'll let him win the first game and then never again, and he'll love you for it." She said it lightly, but she was watching him over the toast, checking. He realized that the house was landing right, that he was not being crushed by it. "Is it all right, being here?" "I should have asked before I just assumed. It's the best place I've ever been," Harry said, and the plainness of it stopped her with the knife in the air, and she put the toast down and did not say anything clever, which from Hermione was a whole speech. They went to Diagon Alley on the 3rd day, ostensibly for school supplies, with Mr. Granger as escort, a tall, mild man who navigated the wizarding world with the unbothered competence of someone who had decided long ago that his daughter's life would simply contain marvels, and he would not embarrass her by gaping at them. He left them at the white marble steps of Gringotts with money for ice cream and instructions to meet him at Flourish and Blots in an hour, and Harry and Hermione climbed the steps together, 2 13-year-olds with a 1,000-year-old secret under their skins, and went in to ask the goblins a question no one had asked in a very long time. The teller who heard them out did not laugh, which Hermione had been braced for. He set down his quill very precisely, looked at the 2 children over the top of a pair of spectacles even narrower than the headmaster's, and said, "You wish to file a claim of inheritance against the estate of Meadin Wilt, whom the human world calls Merlin. His voice gave nothing away. On what basis? On the basis that something of his recognized us, Hermione said. She had rehearsed this on the train and in the cinnamon kitchen and under her breath on the marble steps, and she delivered it level and exact, a scientist reporting a result she could not yet explain. We're not claiming descent. We know there isn't any. The histories are clear that he left no line. We're claiming that a thing he left behind opened to the two of us together and marked us, and we want to know what the Goblin Nation's law says about a claim made by recognition rather than blood. If your law says nothing, we'll go, but I don't think it says nothing. I think your nation kept records when ours kept legends, and I think you know exactly what I'm describing, and I think the look on your face is you deciding whether to tell us. The teller regarded her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he climbed down from his stool, said, "Wait here and touch nothing," and was gone for the better part of half an hour, and when he came back he was not alone. The goblin who came with him was very old, his skin the color of a riverbed, and he wore a chain of dark iron links, and the teller's manner toward him was the manner of a clerk toward a thing closer to a god than a manager. "I am Ragnok," the old goblin said, and did not offer his hand. "Keeper of the deep ledgers, I have not come up from the lower vaults in 19 years. Show me your hands." They held them out together, side by side over the counter, and the old goblin looked at the silver under their skin, the roots and the wing veins, and something moved across his ancient face that might in a human have been awe and might have been dread, and was probably both. "So," he said softly, in the same dry register Harry had heard in the hall, the register of a thing long expected finally arriving. The hearth woke. After 1,000 years it woke, and it woke for a half-blood orphan and a child of 2 who have no magic at all. He raised his black eyes to Hermione. "Do you know what you have asked me to confirm, daughter of dentists? Tell me," Hermione said, "and I will." Ragnok led them to a small stone room with no windows and a basin of still black water in its center, and he had them lay their marked hands in the water together, and he spoke 3 words in a language that made the candle flames line, and the water rose in a thin sheet between their 2 hands and held there, silverlit, and in it the old goblin read what was written. "There is no blood claim," he said. "You were right to say so. Merlin left none by design. He unmade his own line before he died so that no descendant could ever inherit by mere birth what he believed must be earned by 2. What he left instead our oldest ledgers call the seat of Avalon. He let the name settle. It is not a vault of gold, children, though there is gold. It is an office. The oldest office in magical Britain, older than the Wisengamot, older than the ministry by 800 years, older than your school. In the time before the statute, before the founders, when wizards were few and the world was wide and terrible, there was one seat to which the others answered, not by force but by consent, because the one who held it could call the convocation, and what the convocation decided bound. Bound the living and the dead, the wand and the want, in a way no later law has ever managed. Merlin held that seat. He was the last to hold it. And when he saw what men did with single thrones, he did a thing no king before or since has had the wisdom or the cruelty to do. He hollowed it. He sealed the seat so it could never again be held by one, 2 who are one or no one at all. He would rather the office sleep 1,000 years than wake for another tyrant. Ragnok looked at their joined hands in the silver water. "It has slept 1,000 years, and now there are 2. "What does it mean?" Harry said, and his voice came out lower than he meant, "that it woke for us? In plain words, what did we walk into?" In plain words, the old goblin's mouth moved in something that was not a smile. "You have inherited the right to convene the convocation of magical Britain. You have inherited an authority that, if you ever chose to invoke it and could prove it before witnesses, would stand above your ministry and above your Wisengamot and above, I will say it though it will frighten you, above your headmaster, who is the most powerful private man your world has produced in a century, and who has spent that century arranging your world the way a careful man arranges a room. Your 2 children who can, in principle, summon the whole of magical Britain to hall and bind it to your word." He let the water fall back into the basin. "And you are a half-blood boy and a muggle-born girl in an age when the old families have begun again to whisper that blood is everything and that mud should know its place. Do you understand now why your hands are shaking?" Hermione's were not shaking. Harry noticed that Ragnok had said it to provoke her, and that she had refused to oblige. "I understand," she said, "that the moment anyone with power learns a muggle-born girl is co-heir to the oldest authority in Britain, they will try to take it, discredit it, or end the girl. I worked that out the night it happened. What I came here to learn is whether the claim is real and whether it's secret, and you've told me it's real. So tell me the second thing. Who else knows?" Ragnok was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet Harry heard the answer before the old goblin gave it. "The rite I have performed is recorded," Ragnok said. "It must be, that is the law of the deep ledgers, older than my discretion. The record is sealed in the lower vaults where no human may go, but a sealed thing is not an unknown thing. There are families who pay goblins to watch the ledgers for exactly the kind of stir you have caused, and there are goblins who take the pay. I will not pretend otherwise. We are not your friends, children. We are merely older than your enemies." I would give you, at the most, a season before the wrong people begin to wonder why an old keeper came up from the deep vaults for the first time in 19 years. He inclined his head, a gesture with no warmth in it and a great deal of respect. Use the season. They used it carefully, which at 13 mostly meant being afraid in an organized way. Back at school after the holidays, Hermione added a third heading to the slate, beneath things we know and things we don't, and titled it Things to Do Before the Season Ends, and the first item on it was find out how the convocation is actually called, because a right you cannot exercise is a right someone else gets to define for you. The second item was stay together. She had underlined the second one 3 times, and when Harry asked why, since they were always together, she said, because the thing that wants to take this from us doesn't need to kill either of us. It only needs to get us alone. The inscription told us how it breaks. Anyone clever who learns the rule will try to use the rule. She was right. She was nearly always right about the shape of danger, because she had spent her childhood being the clever one in a world that punished it, and she knew in her bones how cleverness could be turned into a knife. The whispers reached the castle before the term was 3 weeks old. Harry felt them the way you feel weather coming, a change in the corridors, certain older Slytherins watching him a beat too long, a hush that fell and lifted as he passed a knot of green-trimmed robes. And then on a Thursday outside the greenhouses, Draco Malfoy stepped into his path with the look of a boy reciting something he had been fed. Potter. Malfoy's eyes went deliberately to Hermione and away, as though touching something he did not want on his glove. My father says interesting things have been crawling out of the lower vaults at Gringotts, old things. He says the goblins have been talking about a claim that hasn't been made in 1,000 years, and about the sort of person who'd be vulgar enough to make it. He smiled, thin and rehearsed. He says when mud starts pretending it's marble, the kindest thing is to remind it what it's made of before it embarrasses itself in front of people who matter. I'd watch yourself, Granger. People who reach above their blood have accidents on the stairs. Hermione did not flinch, which Harry knew cost her, because the word followed her down every corridor of this castle and always would. Tell your father, she said pleasantly, that I read better than his watchers do, and that I know exactly what's in the lower vaults and exactly what it's worth, and exactly how badly men like him want it. And tell him that a thing that breaks when you grab it is not a thing you should send a child to grab. She stepped closer and her voice dropped to something only the 3 of them could hear. We're not the ones who should be careful on the stairs, Draco. Run along. Malfoy went, and he covered it with a sneer, but Harry saw the flicker under it, the same flicker he had seen on Ron, the flicker of a boy who has been handed a script by powerful men and is beginning, somewhere he cannot admit, to suspect it will get him killed. Harry made a note of that flicker too. He was learning, that year, to read the boys the world had decided for, and to wonder which of them might decide otherwise if anyone ever gave them the chance. Knowing the seat was real did not tell them how to wake it the rest of the way, and Hermione would not rest on a right she could not exercise. She set herself to the first item on the slate, how the convocation was actually called, with the grim patience of someone diffusing a thing rather than studying it, and the library gave up its secrets in inches. There was nothing in the open stacks, of course. 1,000-year-old office did not advertise. But she had learned the trick of the castle now, the asking backward, and she went hunting not for Merlin but for the gaps where Merlin had been cut out, the suspicious blanks in the indexes, the footnotes that referred to pages that had been removed, and she mapped the absences until the absences made a shape. It's deliberate, she told Harry one evening, the slate covered in her diagram of missing pages. Someone went through the whole library centuries ago and took out every practical word about how the convocation is summoned and left all the legends in. You're allowed to know it existed. You're not allowed to know how to use it. That's not an accident of history, Harry, that's a policy. Someone decided this knowledge was too dangerous to leave lying about, and they had the run of the Hogwarts library to enforce it, which is a very short list of people. She tapped the slate. The method isn't gone. It's been moved, hidden where the people who hid it could still reach it if they ever needed it, which means there's a second place. The hall under the castle is where Merlin left the seat. There's somewhere else where the instructions are kept, and I'd bet my wand the castle knows where, and I'd bet my other wand the headmaster has at least guessed it exists. It was while she was saying this, leaning over the slate with the chalk dust on her sleeve, that the tapestry of Merithil twitched aside on its rings, and Professor McGonagall stood in the gap with a lantern, and the 2 of them went very still, and the slate sat between them covered in a map of secrets they were not supposed to know. McGonagall looked at the slate. She looked at the blue cup and the white one, the candle, the 2 children who had clearly made a home in a corridor she had walked for 40 years and never thought to check. Harry waited for the deduction of points, the summons to the office, the careful, gentle questions that would end with everything given away. None of it came. The deputy headmistress looked at the slate a moment longer than a teacher who saw only nonsense would have, and something crossed her face, recognition, perhaps, or memory, and when she spoke her voice was dry and even. It is past curfew, she said, by 40 minutes. 10 points from Gryffindor, and you will both be in your dormitories within 10. She turned to go and then paused, the lantern throwing her shadow long up the dead stair, and added, without looking back in a different voice, quieter, "Whatever you have found, Miss Granger, you would do well to remember that the library was not the only thing edited in this castle, nor the most thoroughly. Some of us were here for the editing." The tapestry fell back into place, and she was gone, and Harry and Hermione looked at each other in the candlelight with the same thought arriving in both of them at once. "She knows something," Hermione breathed. "She didn't take the slate. She didn't ask a single question. Harry, she gave us a clue. Some of us were here for the editing. That's not a teacher catching students out of bed. That's a person choosing a side and not wanting to say so out loud. She wrote it on the slate under things we don't, and then, after a moment, moved it up under things we know, and the moving of that one line felt, in the cold corridor, like the first ally they had not had to earn at sword point. The accident, when it came, did not come on the stairs. It came in the library in the last week of January, and it nearly worked." Hermione had gone ahead to their corner to fetch a returns trolley book she'd reserved, a treatise on binding rights she'd been hunting for a fortnight, and Harry was 10 minutes behind her, held up by Flitwick over a misjudged charm. He felt it before he reached the doors. The warmth banked under his breastbone, which had run steady and quiet since the hall, lurched, the way a held note will break if the singer is struck, and he was running before he had decided to run, through the stacks, around the corner to the table that was theirs, and he found Hermione standing with the reserved book open in both hands and her face gone wrong. The book was not a treatise. The pages under her hands were blank, and then not blank, dark lines crawling up out of the paper like roots in fast water, and the lines were reaching for the silver under her skin, and her marked hand had gone bright, too bright, the wing veins flaring as the thing in the book pulled at them, and her mouth was moving, and what it was saying in a flat voice that was not hers was, take it alone. You don't need him. You were always the clever one, take what's yours." It was the temptation from the hall, the kingdom of one, the tower of perfect knowing made into a hook and cast at her when she was by herself, exactly as Hermione had said it would be, except that whoever had made the hook had not understood the most important thing about the lock. They had thought the danger was that she would refuse. The danger was that the book might make her accept alone and burn herself hollow and the legacy with her. Harry did not have a plan. He had a doorway and a thing trying to get past it, which was the oldest arrangement between them and the only one his body needed. He crossed the space and put his marked hand flat over both of hers on the burning page, roots over wings, and he did the thing he had practiced 12 steps down a dead stairwell. He turned his whole attention toward her, all of it, and said not loudly, "I'm here, you're not alone, you never were, mind and heart." The silver under their four hands met and flooded, and the book screamed, an actual sound, paper and ink shrieking as the thing in it found two where it had been promised one. Found the lock it could not pick because the key was never a person but the space between two people, and the dark lines recoiled and burned to ash from the inside, and the covers slammed shut and went still, an ordinary ruined book on an ordinary table, smoking faintly. Hermione's hand was shaking now. She let it. She turned it over under his and gripped hard, the wing veins fading slowly back to frost. "It knew," she said, very quietly looking at the smoking book. "Harry, whoever made that knew the inscription, they knew the exact words. Take what's yours alone, that isn't a guess, that's a quotation. Someone has read the will or talked to something that has, and they're not trying to take the seat from us. They're trying to make one of us take it without the other. They want it to burn us hollow. They'd rather it be destroyed in our hands than ever convened." She looked up at him, and the cleverness in her face had a new edge to it, cold and clear. "That's not the old families wanting marble to stay mud. The old families want it for themselves. This wants it gone. This is something else." Ron found the smoking book before they could get rid of it, because of course he did. Ron had a younger sibling's nose for the thing he was being kept out of. He came round the stacks looking for them with a Quidditch magazine rolled in one fist and stopped at the sight of the two of them bent over a ruined smoking book with their hands locked together, and Harry watched the magazine lower. "What is that?" Ron said, not loudly. That was the worst part. He had a voice for being left out, and it had got quieter over the term "not louder," which Harry had been too busy to properly hear until now. "You've been like this since November, both of you. Going quiet at the same time, disappearing after curfew, and now there's a book on fire and you're holding hands over it like it's going to bite, and when I walk up you both go still like I'm Filch." He looked at their hands. Hermione, to her credit, did not pull hers away. She only met his eyes, which was braver. "I'm not thick," Ron said. "Everyone thinks I'm the thick one next to her, but I'm not. I know when I'm being managed. My mum manages me. My brothers manage me. I came to school so somebody wouldn't, and I picked you too, and now you're doing it as well." "Ron," Harry started. "Is it dangerous?" Ron cut across him. "The thing you're not telling me, just that. Is it the kind of thing that gets people killed?" Harry looked at Hermione. This was a together decision, and he would not make it alone, and she gave him, in the angle of her chin, the answer they had agreed on for exactly this, which was that they would not lie even by silence any more than they had to. Yes, Harry said, it's that kind of thing, and the reason we haven't told you isn't that we don't trust you, it's the opposite. It's that the second you know it, you're in the danger with us, and right now we don't even understand the danger well enough to keep you safe in it. I promised myself you'd be the first, you will be, but I'm not going to hand you a live wire and call it friendship just because you asked to hold it. Ron stood there with his magazine and his quiet hurt, and Harry could see Ron weighing it, a friend who had been managed his whole life deciding whether this was more of the same or something else. When you do tell me, Ron said at last, gruff, not quite meeting Harry's eye, I want the whole of it, not the safe version, the whole thing, and I want you to stop deciding for me what I can carry. My family's done that since I was born. You don't get to as well even if you're being nice about it. He rolled the magazine back up. That's the price, take it or don't. Taken, Harry said, and meant it like a vow because it was won. Ron nodded once, sharp, and went, and the going was stiff but not broken, and Harry understood that he had just been given something rarer than forgiveness, which was a friend's patience offered on terms, with the terms made plain. He thought it might be the most grown-up thing anyone his own age had ever said to him. That night in the alcove behind Marithel, Hermione boiled water with her wand and filled the blue cup in the white one, and they sat with the slate between them and did not write anything for a while. He's right, you know, she said eventually. Ron, about deciding what people can carry, I do it too. I did it to my parents for a year and a half, all those letters where I made everything sound fine. She turned the white cup in her hands. The hall didn't choose two people so one of us could carry the other. It was two so neither of us would have to carry it alone. I keep forgetting that's the whole point. I keep trying to be the tower. You're not the tower, Harry said. You said no to the tower. I watched you. So did you. She looked at him over the steam. That book today. You came round that corner before you could have known anything was wrong. You said you felt it break, the warmth, like a note. Harry, you ran half the length of the library on a feeling. If you'd been 10 seconds slower, I wasn't. I know. That's not the point I'm making. She set the cup down and laid her marked hand flat on the table, wing veins faint in the candlelight, and after a moment he laid his beside it, roots toward her wings, the way the door had wanted, the way the fire had bound. The point I'm making, she said, quieter, is that I have spent my whole life being told I was too much for people, and that I would always, in the end, be doing the important things by myself because no one could keep up. And then a thing 1,000 years old looked at the two of us and decided the opposite. It decided the keeping up was the entire point. I don't have the word for that any more than I did in November. But I know it's the truest thing about my life, and I know someone out there wants to use it to burn me hollow, and I am not going to let them because I'm not by myself anymore, and I am never going back to being by myself, and they have no idea what they're standing in front of. The candle did not flare this time. It only burned steady and small, and the warmth under Harry's breastbone answered the warmth under hers across the little table, two banked coals keeping each other lit, and outside the alcove the castle ticked its second beat, too low for anyone to hear, counting down a season they had been given and meant to use. They made the plan on the slate before they wiped it clean, the way they ended every night now. Find the second place where the method of the convocation had been hidden. Learn how the seat was truly woken, all the way, not the half-waking of the hall. Bring Ron in the moment they could do it without handing him a live wire. Find out what Professor McGonagall had meant and whether her side was a side they could stand on. And underneath all of it, unwritten because it did not need writing, the one rule that held the rest together, that whatever came for them, it would have to take them both at once, and that no clever hook cast at one of them alone would ever again find only one of them there. Mind and heart, Harry said. Mind and heart, said Hermione, and picked the chalk back up because there was a list, and the list was not finished, and neither, by a very long way, were they. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Hollow King's Library. The season Ragnarok had given them stretched, in the end, longer than a season, because the wrong people spent the spring looking in the wrong vaults, and a quiet summer at the Grangers and a quieter one at the Burrow. Let the worst of the whispers go cold. By the time Harry came back to the castle for his third year, taller, with a voice that had started doing unreliable things, the mark under his skin had become as ordinary to him as the scar, and the alcove behind Marithel had a kettle now, because Mr. Granger had given them one as a joke and Hermione had charmed it unbreakable and meant it. It was in the alcove on the third night of term that they finally paid the debt. They had argued about it all summer by owl, in the careful code they'd built, and they had agreed at last that the danger of Ron knowing was now smaller than the danger of the wall the secret had built, and besides, Harry had said in a letter Hermione kept, a thing you protect by keeping someone out stops being worth protecting. So they brought him to the window seat and lit the candle, and Hermione poured a third cup, an old green one she'd found in the kitchens, because there were 3 of them in this now and the table should admit it, and Harry told Ron the whole of it. Not the safe version, the whole thing. The door that opened for 2, the hall under the castle, the fire that had offered each of them a kingdom of 1, the will of a dead king, the seat of Avalon, the goblin in the lower vaults, the book that had screamed in the library. He held nothing back because Ron had set the price in January and Harry meant to pay it in full. Ron sat very still through all of it, the firelight moving on his face, and when Harry finished there was a silence long enough that Hermione started to reach for something to say, and Harry stopped her with a look, because some silences you had to let a person finish on their own. At last Ron let out a breath that had been a long time held. "So," he said, "the two of you are the heirs of Merlin. The actual Merlin, and there's an evil something out there that would rather burn you hollow than let you have it, and you've known since second year." He rubbed his face with both hands. "And you waited 8 months to tell me because you were trying to keep me alive." He dropped his hands. "I'm not going to pretend the waiting didn't hurt because it did, and I'm not going to pretend I understand half of what you just said about hollow thrones, but I'll tell you what I do understand." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the two of them, and there was nothing of the sulky younger brother in him now. "I understand that the most powerful man alive is going to want this, and the darkest one is going to want this, and the old families are going to want this, and the whole lot of them have got money and seats on the Wisengamot and grown wizards who'd kill you without blinking. And you've got a corridor, a kettle, and a list. That's not a fair fight." "No," Hermione said quietly, "it isn't. Good thing I'm here then." Ron picked up the green cup and looked into it. "My family hasn't got money or a single seat that matters, and everyone spent my whole life telling me I'm the spare. But Weasleys have stood at the wrong end of fair fights for about 900 years, and we're still here, and we know things about loyalty that the people with the gold never had to learn." He raised the cup, half a salute, half a joke, all of it meant. "I'm the best spare you'll ever get. I'm in, whatever it costs. And if either of you ever tries to keep me out of the dangerous part again to protect me, I'll tell Malfoy where your corridor is, so don't." Harry felt the warmth under his breastbone do something it had only done for one other person, and he understood that the hall had marked two of them, but that a person could choose to belong to a thing without being chosen by it, and that the choosing was, in some way the inscription had not covered, just as much a binding. "Taken," he said for the second time, and this time Hermione said it with him, and Ron rolled his eyes at the both of them being uncanny again, but he was grinning, and the wall that had stood between them since November came down in a corridor that smelled of wood smoke and tea. The second place revealed itself a week later, and it had been under their feet the whole time. They had gone back to the hall, as they did most weeks now, to sit in the worn seats and let the warmth bank itself deeper, and Hermione had brought her diagram of the library's missing pages, because she could not be in a place of secrets without trying to make it confess. She laid the parchment on the slate floor inside the ring of words and said, half to herself, half to the room, "You hid the rest of it, the method, the how. The library's been gutted of it, and I know it's because someone moved it somewhere they could still reach. So where would Merlin keep the dangerous half of his own legacy? Not out where any heir could grab it. Somewhere you'd only find once you'd already proven you weren't going to misuse the first half." The ring of words lit. It ran round the floor like fire along a fuse, the silver script they had never been able to fully read flaring letter by letter, and at the head of the hall behind the hearth, a section of wall that had always been wall folded itself open the way the hawthorn door had onto a stair going down, and out of the dark below came a smell of old vellum and tallow and cold stone, the smell of a room where someone had once read for a very long time. "It was listening," Hermione whispered. "The hall. It was waiting for us to ask the right question, not to find the door to deserve it." She was already moving toward the stair, and Harry caught her sleeve, and she stopped because that was the rule, and they went down together, wands lit, into the Hollow King's library. The room at the bottom of the stair was round and tall and lined floor to vanishing ceiling with shelves, and the shelves held not only books but instruments, and folded maps of skies that were not quite the sky, and jars of things that turned to watch them pass, and a single great table scarred with the burns and ink stains of a working life. There was no dust here either. There was a fire laid ready in a small grate that lit itself as they entered, and there was, above the grate, a portrait frame, and the frame was empty, and the empty frame had a small brass plate that Hermione bent to read aloud in a voice gone strange. "Meodin Wilt," she read. "Harry, this is the frame, the one from the Slytherin common room, the one the portrait walked out of 600 years ago. It didn't leave the castle, it came down here. It's been waiting in its own library for 600 years for someone worth coming back for." 591, said a voice, but who is counting? And the portrait was no longer empty. The figure that settled into the painted chair was not the white-bearded thunderer of the storybooks. He was old, yes, but spare and quick, with a clipped iron-gray beard and eyes that moved like a man doing sums, dressed in plain dark robes with ink on the cuffs, and he looked the two of them over with the frank, assessing interest of a master examiner who has been promised the year's best students and is reserving judgment. "Two," he said, and there was a weight on the word that Harry recognized from the goblin and from the fire. After all this time, and all the clever fools who came alone and went away empty too. A boy who walks like he's guarding a door even standing still, and a girl who came into my library and immediately tried to interrogate it. His painted mouth moved. "I left a great many traps, children, for those who would take what I built. I did not leave a single one for those who would deserve it, because I could not imagine in 1,000 years that anyone would sit. We have a great deal to do, and you are both younger than I feared and exactly as I hoped. They sat at the scarred table, and Merlin's portrait taught them, and the teaching was not what Harry had braced for. He had expected spells, secret words, weapons. What Merlin gave them instead that first night and the many nights after was a single relentless argument, turned over and over, that power was the easy part and the deadly part, and that the whole of his life's wisdom could be put in one sentence a child could carry. The question is never what you can do, it is what you will refrain from doing when you can do anything. I held the seat, the portrait said. I called the convocation 4 times in my life, and 4 times the whole of magical Britain came when I called and was bound by what we decided. And do you know how many times I wanted to call it a 5th, for a thing that was right, that I knew was right, that any decent person could see was right? His painted eyes were hard. Hundreds. And I did not, because the day you convene the world to enforce a thing because you alone can see it is right is the day you have become the thing the seat exists to prevent. I gave kings their crowns and took them back. I could have ruled. It would have been so easy and so reasonable, and I would have done so much good for about 10 years until the good I did became the good I demanded, and the demanding became the only language I had left. I have watched it happen to better wizards than me. I built the lock on this throne the way you build a wall around a fire you're afraid of, and the fire was myself. Then why leave it at all? Hermione asked, if it's that dangerous. Why not unmake it? Why leave it to anyone? Because the alternative is worse, Merlin said. A world with no seat at all is a world where the strong simply take, and no one can call them to account because there is no court old enough and high enough to bind them. The seat is a danger. The absence of the seat is a certainty. So I did the only honest thing, which was to make a danger that could only be wielded by 2, and bound them with a lock that no single appetite can pick, and then I trusted across 1,000 years that someday the world would make 2 people stubborn enough to choose each other over a kingdom, and decent enough to be frightened of their own power. He looked between them. I am told it has happened. Let us find out if I was a fool to believe it. The trial came at the end of the 3rd week, and it did not announce itself. Harry only understood afterward that everything before it had been the building of the test and not the test, that Merlin had been teaching them the way a swordmaster teaches the grip for a month before he ever lets you near an edge. One evening the portrait was simply not in its frame, and on the scarred table lay a thing none of them had seen, a ring of pale metal set on a black cloth, and beside it in Merlin's spidery hand a single card. The convocation answers the one who wears it. Whoever wears the ring may call the world and bind it, alone this once in this room, to test the wearing. One of you choose. Harry reached for the ring without thinking, to put it as far from Hermione as he could, because his whole body had decided in an instant that if one of them had to bear a dangerous thing it would be him, and Hermione's hand came down flat on his wrist before his fingers touched the metal. No, she said, look at it properly, look at what it's actually asking. She was reading the card again, and he watched the cleverness come up in her like a tide. It says one of us can call the convocation alone this once to test the wearing. Harry, the entire legacy is built on the rule that one is never allowed. The fire told us, the inscription told us. Merlin spent the last 3 weeks telling us over and over, the question is never what you can do. And then he leaves a ring on a table that lets one of us do the forbidden thing, and a little card that says choose in his own hand the cleverest wizard who ever lived. She looked up. It's not a gift, it's the test, the whole test. He's not asking which of us is worthy to wear it. He's asking whether we'll keep the lock when we're handed a perfectly good reason to break it, whether we'll trust the rule more than we trust ourselves, and the only way to pass is to refuse the ring, both of us, out loud. What if you're wrong, Harry said, and it's real, and we need it someday, and we threw it away? Then we find another road, Hermione said, the way Merlin found 4 roads in a lifetime instead of taking the easy one. That's the whole point, there's always another road. The ring is the road that ends with one of us alone on a throne, however good our reasons, and I would rather lose every fight ahead of us than win one by becoming the thing he built this to stop. She turned her marked hand over and laced her wing-veined fingers through his root-veined ones on the table, an inch from the pale ring neither of them would touch. Mind and heart, we don't wear it, either of us, ever. Say it with me. We don't wear it, Harry said, and the words came out of him easier than he expected, because she was right and because the alternative had a cold in it he had felt once already in the hall, looking at a version of himself alone in an empty room. Not you, not me. Not for any reason, we find another road. The ring on the black cloth went to ash, the way the book had gone to ash, soundlessly this time, and where it had lain the cloth was scorched in the shape of a hand that closed and let go, and Merlin's portrait was back in its frame, and the painted old wizard was looking at the 2 of them with something Harry had not seen on that spare hard face before, which was a kind of peace. 591 years, Merlin said softly, I have waited in this frame to find out whether I had built a wise thing or only a lonely one. Every age sent me its prodigies. Grindelwald himself came down that stair, did you know, a young man, brilliant, certain he was kind, and he reached for the ring before I had finished setting it down, and I sent him away, and he hated me for it, and he was right to, because I had shown him the one thing he could never have, and he spent the rest of his life trying to build a worse one. The portrait inclined its head, a master to two students who had passed. You did not reach, you argued, you distrusted yourselves correctly. That is the rarest magic there is, and no wand teaches it. The library is yours, children, all of it, and God help whoever comes for you, because they are going to find two, and they have spent 1,000 years forgetting what two can do. In the nights after, the portrait taught them the practical thing the library had kept hidden longest, the calling of the convocation itself, and Harry was almost disappointed to learn it was not a spell at all. There is no incantation, Merlin said, because an incantation can be stolen, spoken by the wrong mouth, forced from a tortured tongue. The convocation answers a deed, not a word. The two heirs must stand together upon ground the old magic knows, with witnesses enough that the truth cannot afterward be unsaid, and they must claim the seat aloud in their own names of their own will, and submit to the proving. Then the land decides. If the lock holds, if you're truly two who are one, the whole of magical Britain feels the call in their wands and their bones wherever they stand, and the bound among them come, and what is decided binds. If the lock does not hold, if there is a lie in you, if one of you covets what belongs to both, the proving will not crown you, it will end you where you stand. He had let that sit. It is not a thing to attempt because you are clever, it is a thing to attempt because you are certain. Be certain, children, or be elsewhere. It was Professor McGonagall who told them what the library could not, because the library held what Merlin had known, and Merlin had been dead 1,000 years and could not tell them what the living headmaster had done. She did not catch them out of bed this time. She sent for Harry by daylight, a folded note in her own hand, and when he came to her office she had Hermione there already, the two of them seated before her desk with tea poured in plain cups, and she shut the door with her wand and warded it with 3 movements Harry did not recognize and Hermione clearly did, because she went very alert. McGonagall sat and folded her hands and looked at them over her spectacles for a long moment, an old soldier deciding to break an order she had kept for 40 years. I told you in your 2nd year, she said, that the library was not the only thing edited in this castle, and that some of us were here for the editing. I have thought about that sentence every day since. It was a coward's way of telling you the truth, a hint dropped and then abandoned, because I had given my word a long time ago to a man I have followed through 2 wars and trust with my life, and I did not want to be the one to break it. Her jaw tightened. I find I no longer care what I want. You are children, and you are carrying something that grown wizards have died reaching for, and you have a right to know who is standing behind you in the dark, even if it is someone who loves you. The headmaster, Hermione said quietly, he knows about the seat. He has known its name since before your parents were born, McGonagall said. Albus does not stumble onto old powers, he maps them decades in advance, the way other men map their gardens. He knew the seat of Avalon slept beneath this castle. He knew its lock, that it would wake only for 2 bound souls and never for one. He knew that no single wizard, not Grindelwald, not himself, could ever take it, and I will tell you plainly that this knowledge has been one of the quiet sorrows of his life, because Albus Dumbledore has spent 90 years being the one strong enough to be trusted with dangerous things, and here is the one dangerous thing his strength can never hold. She poured herself tea she did not drink. The instruments in his office fell silent the night the hearth woke. He came to me before dawn, gray as ash, and he said, "It has happened, Minerva, it has woken, and I am very much afraid it has woken for Harry." Harry sat with that. The warmth under his breastbone had gone still and listening. He's known since the start, he said. Since 2nd year, the cocoa, the questions about the castle being awake. He knew exactly what had happened, and he sat there and asked me if I'd been sleeping well. He did. McGonagall's voice did not soften the thing, which Harry was grateful for. And you will want to know why, and I can only tell you what he told me, and you may decide for yourselves whether it is wisdom or only a very old habit of control wearing wisdom's coat. He said that you were 13. He said that the moment you understood what you held, you would be hunted by everyone who has ever wanted to rule, and that a child who does not know the size of his own secret keeps it better than a child who does. He said he meant to watch over you quietly and guide you towards safety, and tell you the whole of it when you were old enough and strong enough to survive the knowing. She set down the cup. He believes that. I want you to understand that he genuinely believes it, because the dangerous thing about Albus has never been that he lies. It is that he tells the truth selectively and steers by what he withholds, and he has done it for the greater good so many times and been so often right that he has stopped being able to feel the difference between protecting a child and managing a piece on a board. There's more, Hermione said. It was not a question. She had been watching McGonagall's face. There's a reason he's particularly afraid for Harry, particularly, more than just the seat, isn't there? McGonagall was silent for a long moment, and in the silence Harry understood that they had reached the edge of what even she would break her word to give. Are things, she said at last carefully, that are Albus's to tell and that he guards for reasons that are not only control, reasons that touch on your scar, Harry, and on a night you were too small to remember and on words spoken before you were born. I will not take those from him, they are not mine, and some of them I do not fully know, and a half-told truth about that is more dangerous than silence. She looked at Harry, and the steel in her gave way for a moment to something worn and tender. But I will tell you this much because you have earned at least a door to push on. Ask him about the prophecy. Use that word prophecy and watch his face, and you will learn more from what he does than from anything he says. And when you ask together, the two of you, because the one protection you have that he did not plan for, that he cannot map, is that there are two of you, and he is used to a world of ones. The strike came on a night in late November, almost a year to the day from the hall's waking, and it came because their season had run out, exactly as the goblin had warned, and someone clever had finally followed the thread all the way down. His name, they learned later, was Silas Greaves, and he had been an unspeakable in the Department of Mysteries until they put him out for selling the things he was sworn to guard, and he had spent the years since selling them to anyone who would pay, and the someone who had paid him to find the seat had not paid him to bring it back. They had paid him to make sure it could never be used. He came into the castle through a passage the Marauder's map did not show, because Greaves dealt in the maps that mapped the map makers, and he found the hawthorn door and he could not open it, because it opened for two who were one and he was one who served no one, and so he did the thing a clever, ruthless man does when he cannot pick a lock. He waited by it for the people who could. They had brought Ron down for the first time that night to show him the hall and the library, because he was sworn now and the keeping out was over. They came round the last turn of the service stair three abreast, and Greaves stepped out of a shadow that the wand light should have filled and did not, and Harry had half a second of warning, the warmth under his breastbone going to ice before the curse came. It was not aimed at Harry. It was aimed at Hermione, because Greaves had read the will too, and the will had taught him the only thing he needed to know, which was that you did not have to take the seat to win. You only had to make it one. Kill one of the two and the pair was broken forever and the seat would sleep again, and the thing that had hired him would have what it wanted, which was nothing, which was for no one to have it. The curse that left his wand was the color of a drowned thing, and it had no counter Hermione could have raised in time, and she did not have to, because Ron Weasley, who had been a wizard for 2 years and a spare for 13 and who had sworn an oath in a corridor over a green cup, was already moving. He hit Hermione at the waist and took her down, and the curse took him instead, across the shoulder and chest, and the sound he made was a sound Harry would hear in bad dreams for years. Then there was no more thinking, only the door Harry had been since the troll, the door he had been built to be, and he stood over the two of them on the cold stone and reached not for a spell but for her, for Hermione, scrambling up with Ron's blood on her hands and her marked hand flaring. And across 2 feet of dark their silver met the way it had met on the hawthorn door, roots into wings, and the hall behind them, the whole sleeping legacy of 1,000 years, woke to defend the two it had chosen. Greaves got off one more curse, the castle ate it. The torches in the passage did not gutter this time. They flared white-silver, the color of the mark, and the stone of the walls leaned inward, and a sound came up through the floor that was the chord from the hall turned to a single furious note, and Harry felt the power of the seat move through him and through Hermione both at once, not his and not hers but theirs, the thing that only existed in the space between them, and it took the shape their joined will gave it, which was not death, because they were 13 and would not be murderers, but a wall. A wall of old air and older stones slammed down the passage and took Silas Greaves off his feet and pinned him to the far wall and held him there, gasping, his wand snapping in his hand like a dry reed, while above him the castle made its fury known in a language that predated wands, and the discredited unspeakable who had sold every secret he ever swore to keep wept like a child at the sound of it. "Ron," Hermione was saying, "Ron, Ron, stay with me, look at me," her wand already moving over the wound in the diagnostic patterns she'd taught herself from a book this summer before, because of course she had, and Harry held the wall on the screaming man with a strength he had never owned alone and did not own now, only borrowed from her, from the hall, from the two of them being two. Ron's eyes found Harry's. He was gray and his breath came wrong and there was too much blood, and he tried to grin, the idiot he actually tried. "Told you," Ron got out, "best spare you'll ever get." "Shut up," Harry said, his voice breaking. "Shut up and don't you dare, you're not the spare, you were never the spare." "Hermione, he's alive," the curse caught the shoulder not the heart. "I can hold it but I can't heal it. We need Madame Pomfrey, we need her now." And Hermione's voice was shaking and her hands were not, and Harry understood that this was the cost the inscription had never spelled out, that being chosen meant the people who chose you back could bleed for it, and that he would spend the rest of his life standing in doorways trying to make sure they did not. They did not try to hide it after that, because there was no hiding a curse-struck boy, and a captured unspeakable, and a passage full of leaning stone. They sent Harry's patroness, the great silver stag he had only learned that autumn, to find McGonagall, and she came at a run with Madame Pomfrey behind her. And by the gray hour before dawn Ron was breathing easier under a dozen charms in the hospital wing, his mother already summoned, and Silas Greaves was bound in a holding ward with the castle still humming its anger at him through the floor. It was McGonagall who questioned him, with Dumbledore standing silent at the foot of the cot, and it was Harry and Hermione, refusing to be sent to bed, who heard the answer that changed everything. Greaves, broken and babbling, did not know who had hired him. He had dealt through 3 layers of go-betweens, the way careful buyers do, but he knew the shape of the order, and the shape of the order was the thing that turned Harry cold. They didn't want it, Greaves said, rocking, his eyes on the humming walls. That's what I couldn't understand. You take a job to fetch a thing, but they didn't want it fetched, they wanted it killed in the cradle. They wanted the two made into one so it'd sleep again forever, and there's only one kind of client pays a fortune to make sure nobody, not even them, can ever have a power like that. He looked up, and there was a horror on his ruined face that was almost reverence. Only one wizard's that frightened of a throne he can't sit on, only one. And he's supposed to be dead. Dumbledore did not move at the foot of the cot, but Harry was watching him now the way McGonagall had taught him to watch, and he saw the old wizard's face do the thing she had promised it would do, the brief unguarded truth before the wool came back, and what was on it was not surprise. It was confirmation. Dumbledore had known this too. Dumbledore had been waiting all this time for a name he already suspected, and the name was the one he had spent Harry's whole life refusing to say. Mrs. Weasley arrived at the hospital wing before noon the next day, having traveled half the night, and she went through the doors like weather. She had Ron's face in both hands before Madame Pomfrey could get a word in, turning it to the light, counting him the way mothers count, and only when she had satisfied herself that the worst was past did she sit down heavily on the edge of the cot and begin, quietly and without any drama at all, to cry, which Harry found harder to watch than the curse had been. "You great fool," she said to Ron, stroking his hair off his forehead. "You absolute Weasley, throwing yourself in front of a curse. Where do you think you learned that? Who do you think taught you?" And Ron, who would have died before admitting he liked being fussed over, let her fuss and looked at the ceiling and let his eyes go bright too. She turned to Harry and Hermione where they stood at the foot of the cot, and Harry waited for the anger because someone's child had nearly died and he was tangled in the reason, and he had spent 11 years learning that when something went wrong the nearest unwanted boy was the one who paid for it. The anger did not come. Mrs. Weasley looked at the two of them, the dark circles under their eyes, the dried blood Hermione had not got all the way off her cuff, and whatever Ron had managed to tell her in the night, it had been enough because she opened her arms and said, "Come here, both of you, this instant," and Harry found himself folded into a hug that smelled of wood smoke and wool and something baked, and he stood very still inside it, the way you stand still when you are afraid a good thing will notice you and stop. "He chose it," Hermione said into Mrs. Weasley's shoulder, her voice wrecked. "Ron, he chose to. We didn't ask him. We'd never have asked him. He just—" "I know he did," Mrs. Weasley said. "He's mine. Of course he did." She held them out at arm's length and looked from one marked, exhausted face to the other, and there was no fear in her at all, only a fierce and total decision, the kind Harry had only ever seen on Hermione. "Now you listen to me, the pair of you. I don't understand the half of what my son's got himself into, and from the bits I've pieced together I'm not sure I want to, but I understand this much. You're his now the way he's yours, and that makes you mine, and I have buried 2 brothers to war already, and I will not bury one more soul I've claimed without a fight that the other side remembers." She gathered them back in, one under each arm, Ron grinning weakly at the spectacle of it from his cot. "So whatever's coming for you children, it's coming for a family. They should have thought of that before they sent a man down a stair after my boy. Families like ours are exactly what the people with the gold never see until it's too late." Harry stood in the warm circle of her arm and understood, somewhere under the breastbone where the legacy was banked, that the hall had marked 2 of them and a corridor had sworn a 3rd, and now a kitchen in Devon had claimed all of them at once. And that this, the widening of it, the way a family kept getting bigger by people simply deciding, might be the most powerful magic he had encountered yet, older even than Merlin's, and the one thing no curse on any stair would ever be able to break. They headed out in the alcove 3 nights later, when Ron was strong enough to be moved there in a floating chair Hermione had charmed soft, because some conversations could not happen in a hospital wing, and could not happen in the headmaster's office, and could only happen in the one place in the castle that belonged to the 3 of them and no one else. The kettle steamed. The blue cup and the white cup and the green one sat in a row. Ron, pale and bandaged and absolutely refusing to be treated like glass, listened while Hermione laid it out on the slate in her smallest, most ruthless hand. "Here's where we are," she said. "We've been trying to stay hidden, and tonight proved hidden is finished. Greaves found us. The next one will be better than Greaves. And we finally know who's sending them, or at least we can guess, and if it's who Greaves thinks it is, who the headmaster's face says it is, then we are not in a game about old families and Wisengamot seats anymore. We are in the path of the one wizard who frightened the whole of Britain into not saying his name." She set down the chalk, So we have two choices, and I've been over them 100 times, and they're both terrible. We can keep hiding and get picked off one at a time, because the enemy only needs to win once and we have to win every single night for the rest of our lives. Or we stop hiding, Harry said, on purpose, all the way. Or we claim it, Hermione said, publicly. We convene the convocation, or we prove the claim before enough witnesses that it can't be buried, and we make the whole world know that there are two heirs of Merlin and exactly who they are. And yes, that means every old family in the ministry and the headmaster himself all suddenly have to reckon with two 13-year-olds who outrank them in a law older than all of them, and they will hate it, and some of them will try to control it, and it will be a war on every front at once. She looked between the three of them. But here's the thing about that war. You can't quietly murder a secret you don't know exists. The moment we're public, killing one of us isn't a tidy way to put out a fire nobody's noticed. It's the assassination of an heir of Merlin in front of the world, and even the wizard who frightened Britain has to think twice about that. The safest place for a secret this big to be is nowhere. The safest place for a target this big to be is everywhere at once in the light, where the killing of it would cost the killer more than the having of it. Ron whistled low and winced because whistling pulled at the bandages. You want to walk into the middle of the room, he said, and turn on all the lights and dare the whole lot of them to do something about it. I want to be too bright to murder quietly, Hermione said. Yes. Harry looked at the two of them, the friend who had taken a curse meant for her and the girl who had refused a kingdom to keep him, and he thought about Merlin's portrait saying there's always another road, and he thought about a wall of old air slamming a clever cruel man against the stone, and he found that the fear he had carried since the hospital wing had changed in his chest into something with a harder edge. Not bravery, exactly. Resolve. The thing you have left when hiding is finished and running is finished, and the only ground left to stand on is your own. Then we do it right, he said. We don't get dragged into the light by an accident or an enemy. We choose the moment, we choose the witnesses, we learn from Merlin exactly how the convocation is called, and when we step into that room, we step into it the way we did everything else. He put his marked hand on the table, roots toward the wing veins that came to meet it, and Ron, after a moment, laid his bandaged hand over both, because he had earned the right and they would never again pretend he hadn't. Together, Hermione said. Mind and heart, said Harry, and the best spare in Britain. Ron snorted and it turned into a laugh, and the laugh turned into a wince, and outside the alcove the castle ticked its second beat louder now, no longer counting down a hidden season but counting toward a chosen day. And the three of them sat in the candlelight and began very seriously to plan how two children would summon the world. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The convocation 2 years can be a long preparation or a short reprieve, and theirs was both. By the autumn of their 5th year, Harry had grown into his hands and his voice, and most of the way into the thing the hall had woken in him, and the alcove behind Marithel had a second kettle, because the first had finally died of overwork, and the slate had been replaced 3 times, and there were 4 cups now in the row, since Ginny Weasley had come into the secret the previous spring by the simple method of refusing to be left out of anything her brother nearly died for. They were not children anymore, exactly. They were not anything the world had a tidy word for. They were the best prepared thing 2 hunted teenagers could make of themselves, which is to say they were ready and afraid and out of time. In the 2 years between the strike on the stair and the writ at breakfast, they had become a thing the school did not have a category for, and learned to use it. They went down to the Hollow King's library most weeks, and Merlin's portrait drilled them the way a hard master drills the only students he will ever have, not in power but in the refusing of it, setting them problems of judgment that had no clean answers, and watching how they argued their way to the least cruel one. Hermione filled 3 notebooks with the law of the convocation, and burned them all once she had it by heart. Harry learned to hold the wall the hall had taught him on the stair alone for whole minutes, and learned the harder thing, which was when to let it fall. They grew, the way you grow when something is coming and you can feel the date of it without knowing the number, fast and quietly, and with a seriousness that frightened the adults who loved them. Ginny had forced her way in the previous spring, having pieced together more from her brother's nightmares than Ron ever meant to give, and she had sat in the alcove with her arms folded, and informed the 3 of them that she had nearly been killed by a memory in a diary in her 1st year, that she knew better than any of them what it felt like to be the thing a dark power reached for, and that she would rather be in the danger with her eyes open than be protected into a corner ever again. There was no arguing with it because it was true, and because she was right, and because a 4th cup had appeared on the row before anyone formally decided it would. The found family kept doing that, Harry noticed. It kept getting larger by people simply refusing to be left at the edge of it, and every time it did, the thing in him that had spent 11 years certain he belonged nowhere grew a little quieter. And under all of it, in the long ordinary hours that were not training or planning or fear, something between him and Hermione had gone on deepening without either of them naming it, the way a root goes on into the dark whether or not anyone is watching. They were 15 and 16 now, not the children the hall had marked. He had caught himself more than once that autumn, losing the thread of what she was saying because of the particular way she pushed her hair back when she was 3 steps ahead of a problem, and he had seen her catch herself watching him fly, and both of them had looked quickly away and said nothing, because there was a war coming and the timing was wrong and the friendship was too precious to risk on a thing they were not old enough to need to answer yet. So they let it go on rooting in the dark, unspoken, certain, and turned their faces to the danger, and the danger came. The enemy had not been idle either. The man who frightened Britain had not shown his face, not yet, but his frightened intelligence had reached into the Wisengamot through the old families the way water reaches into a cellar, and his patience had a new shape now, because patience that cannot kill a thing quietly will settle in the end for making the thing illegal. Lucius Malfoy had spent 2 years and a great deal of gold building the legal box, and in October he closed the lid. It came as a writ, delivered to Hermione at breakfast by a ministry owl with a black seal, and she read it twice, very still, and then passed it to Harry without a word, and Harry read the careful poison language of it and understood that the war had finally chosen its first front. "They're not coming for the seat," Hermione said quietly, under the ordinary clamor of the hall. "They're cleverer than that. They've worked out they can't take it, so they're going to prove the claim was never valid. Look at the wording. A special sitting of the Wisengamot to rule on the matter of an unlawful inheritance asserted by a witch of non-magical parentage, with a secondary motion to bind the said witch under the restriction of Anomalous Magics Act pending review." Her finger was steady on the parchment. "That's me, Harry. The whole thing is built around me. They can't unmake what the hall did, so they're going to legally erase the half of it they think is weaker. If they get a ruling that a Muggle-born can't hold the seat, then there aren't 2 heirs in the eyes of the law. There's one, you alone, and an heir alone is an heir who can be managed or bound or quietly burned hollow exactly the way Greaves was paid to do. They're trying to do with a court what they couldn't do with a curse. Make it one." "Then they've already lost," Harry said, and was a little surprised by how certain he sounded, "because they've put the whole Wisengamot in a room to do it. They've gathered the witnesses for us." She looked up at him, and he watched the fear in her face reorganize itself into the cold, clean thing it became when she had found the lever, the thing he had loved in her since a window seat and a chipped blue cup. "They have, haven't they?" she said slowly. "They want to hold a trial about whether we're the heirs of Merlin. And a trial needs the accused to stand up in front of everyone and answer." The corner of her mouth moved. "We're not going to answer, Harry. We're going to claim. They've spent Lucius Malfoy's fortune building us a stage and filling it with exactly the witnesses Merlin's proving requires, and they're going to be standing in the room when the land decides." The danger in it was not small, and they did not pretend otherwise in the alcove that night with the 4 of them and the 4 cups and Ginny's sharp questions cutting to the bone of every plan. Merlin's proving did not grade on effort. Stand on the old ground, claim the seat aloud before witnesses, submit to the proving, and the land decided, and if there was a lie anywhere in the claiming, a covetousness, a single soul reaching for what wanted to, the proving did not crown. It ended you where you stood. They would be wagering their lives in front of the assembled power of magical Britain on the proposition that they were exactly what they believed themselves to be. "It only kills you if you're lying," Ron said. "Right, if one of you secretly wants it for yourself, so." He spread his hands, the scar on his shoulder pulling under his shirt the way it did when he gestured too wide. "Do either of you want it for yourself without the other?" He looked between them, blunt as a hammer, which was his particular gift. "Because if the answer's no, and I've watched you 2 for 4 years, and I'd bet my life the answer's no, then it isn't a gamble. It's just a very frightening way of telling the truth in public." Hermione looked at Harry across the candle, and Harry looked back, and the warmth banked under his breastbone reached across the little table toward the warmth under hers, the way it had on 100 nights, and neither of them had to say it, because Ron had already said it for them, and he was right, the way the people who love you are sometimes right about you before you are. "No," Harry said anyway, out loud, because some truths you owed the air. "I don't want it without her. I've never wanted anything without her. The fire offered me a kingdom of one when I was 13, and I told it no, and I'd tell it no again tonight, and I'd tell it no in front of the whole Wisengamot with my life on the answer." He turned his marked hand over on the table. "Let them build their stage. Let's go and tell the truth so loudly the whole country feels it." It was Dumbledore who chose the room, and that was the last gift his management ever gave them, though he did not know he was giving it. The old families had wanted the sitting at the ministry, in the deep amphitheater where the Wisengamot tried its enemies, and the seats rose in tears of disapproval, and a child stood small in a chained chair at the bottom. Dumbledore, as chief warlock, overruled them. He did it gently in the reasonable voice that had bent committees for 50 years, and his reason was kindness itself, that the matter touched on the deep history of the school, that the witnesses included Hogwarts staff and students who should not be dragged to London, that an old man would prefer to convene his colleagues somewhere he could keep an eye on 2 children he had watched grow. He arranged for the special sitting to be held at Hogwarts in the Founders' Hall, the great disused ceremonial chamber under the east towers that had not seen the full Wisengamot in 300 years, because he believed that on his own ground in his own castle, he could steer whatever happened back toward safety, as he had steered everything else. Hermione cried a little when she heard, not from fear, and Harry understood why before she explained it. "Put us on the oldest ground in Britain," she said. "The Founders' Hall, Harry, the footnote, last seen in the Founders' Hall. It's where Merlin's portrait used to hang before he walked down to his library. It sits on the deepest foundation in the castle, older than the Founders, the ground the hall and the library grow out of. It's the most awake stone in the whole country, and the chief warlock just ordered the entire Wisengamot to assemble on it to put me on trial because he thinks it's his." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her marked hand. "He's the cleverest man alive, and he's about to learn that managing two people who tell each other everything is a different problem than managing the world." They told no one their plan, not even McGonagall, who had to be able to say truthfully that she had not known, though when Harry passed her in the corridor the morning of the sitting she looked at him a moment too long and said only, "Stand up straight, Potter, whatever happens." "Your mother did once in a room very like that one," and he carried that with him down to the Founders' Hall like a warm stone in his pocket. The hall had been woken for the occasion, swept and lit, and it was vast, a long stone chamber with a vaulted roof lost in shadow and a floor of old slate worked, Harry saw with a lurch, in a great ring of inlaid silver words exactly like the smaller ring in the hall beneath the castle, so worn by centuries of feet that no one had read them in living memory. The Wisengamot filled the tiered benches in their plum robes, 200 of the most powerful witches and wizards in Britain, and the press was there behind a rope, quills already scratching. And the old family sat in a block near the front with Lucius Malfoy at their head in robes that cost more than the Weasleys' house, and Cornelius Fudge fidgeted in the minister's box, and high above them all in the chief warlock's chair sat Albus Dumbledore. Grave and gentle and entirely in command of a room he did not yet understand he had lost. Harry and Hermione walked in together down the long aisle between the benches, two 15-year-olds in plain school robes with the whole assembled authority of magical Britain turning to watch them come. And Ron and Ginny and the Weasleys filled a bench near the back, and somewhere a reporter whispered the word that ran round the hall like a draft, the word that had been a rumor for 2 years and was about to become a fact, and the word was heirs. They did not go to the chained chair set out for the accused. Hermione looked at it once, the cruel seat at the bottom of the tiers, and walked past it, and a murmur went up at the breach of form, and Lucius Malfoy rose smoothly to make it a weapon. "Already we see it," Lucius said, his voice pitched to Carrie, smooth as poured oil. "Chief Warlock, members of the Wisengamot, the accused will not even sit where the law directs. Is it any wonder? We are asked today to believe that the oldest and highest dignity in our history, the legacy of Merlin himself, the blood of the first and greatest of us, has chosen to settle, of all the wizards in Britain, upon a half-blood boy and a girl born to two people who cannot so much as light a candle. He let the contempt show just enough. I do not say it to be cruel. I say it because it is absurd, and because absurdities, left unchallenged, become the cracks through which everything we have built drains away. Merlin's legacy is a thing of blood and breeding and 1,000 years of careful descent. To allow it to be claimed by a mud, he caught himself with exquisite false delicacy, by a muggle-born, is to declare that nothing we are is worth preserving. I move that the claim be struck, and that the girl Granger be bound under the act before her unschooled and anomalous magic does to our history what it has already done to our common sense." He sat to a rustle of approval from the front benches, and Fudge nodded along, and Harry felt the old hatred rise in him, the clean hot thing, and he did not let it move his hands, because Hermione had taught him over 4 years that the hatred was what they wanted, that an angry boy was a manageable boy, and that the only thing in that room Lucius Malfoy could not survive was the truth spoken calmly. Dumbledore raised one hand, and the hall stilled, and he looked down at the two of them with an expression of such genuine grandfatherly concern that Harry almost faltered, because it was real. The old wizard did love him in his careful steering way, and the love was the hardest thing in the room to stand against. "Harry," Dumbledore said gently, and used the first name deliberately, a grandfather among colleagues, "Miss Granger, no one here wishes you harm. These are old and delicate matters, and I think it would be best if you allowed me to speak for the deeper history involved, which I know better than most living wizards, and if you placed your trust, as you have before, in those of us who have spent long lifetimes keeping such powers safe. Sit, let me help you. There is no need for either of you to carry this alone." It was the kindest possible trap, and it was the same trap as the Coco, 2 years grown, and it asked them to hand him the thing and be children again and be safe. And Harry looked up at the old wizard he had wanted more than once to simply obey, and he gave him the only answer that had ever been true. "We don't carry it alone, sir," Harry said. His voice did not shake, and it carried because the old slate under his feet had begun, very faintly, to warm. "That's the whole point. That's the thing none of you have understood, not Mr. Malfoy, not the Wisengamot, not even you. You've spent this entire morning arguing about which one of us really holds it, as if it could ever be won, as if it were a crown you put on a single head." He took Hermione's hand there in front of 200 of the most powerful people in Britain, roots reaching for wings, and the silver under their skin woke and shone through, visible for the first time to eyes that were not theirs, and the hall drew a single breath. "It was never going to be one of us. It can't be. The man who built it made sure, so we're not going to answer your trial. We're going to end your argument the only way it can be ended." Harry, Dumbledore said, and there was something new in his voice now under the warmth, the first true alarm Harry had ever heard from him, because the old wizard had finally seen the shape of it. "Harry, whatever you are about to do, I must counsel you most strongly. We claim the seat of Avalon," Hermione said, clear and ringing to the whole assembled hall, and the old words under their feet lit, "both of us, of our own will, in our own names. Harry James Potter and Hermione Jean Granger, the two who are one, and we submit ourselves to the proving here on the old ground, before every witness you have so kindly gathered. Let the land decide what no court can, and the Founders' Hall, which had waited 300 years, and the ground beneath it, which had waited 1,000, answered them." It began as the chord, the note Harry had first felt in his teeth on a window seat at 13, but it rose now through 300 years of slate and 1,000 years of older stone, and it filled the Founders' Hall from the floor to the lost vault of its roof, and every wand in the room sang in its owner's hand, 200 wands ringing the same impossible note, so that witches and wizards who had come to sneer felt their own magic answer the call against their will and knew, in their merit, that they were in the presence of a thing older and higher than anything their offices had taught them to respect. The ring of silver words around the floor caught light and ran, letter by letter, a circle of fire that was not fire, and where Harry and Hermione stood at its center the old slate softened and rose, not into the plain worn seats of the hidden hall but into their truth, 2 chairs of pale stone and living light grown straight up out of the foundation of the country, facing not each other now but the assembled world, side by side equal, a throne with 2 seats and no higher one. The silver under their joined hands poured up their arms and met above their heads and became a single arch of light, roots and wings woven, and the proving took them. Harry felt it go through him the way the recognition had gone through him in the hall, but vaster, because this was not the castle alone now, this was the land. He felt Britain unroll beneath him, every old stone of it, the standing circles on the moors and the drowned causeways and the hill forts and the deep places under the cities, all of it waking at once and turning its ancient attention to hall under the east towers of a school. And he felt the proving reach into him for the lie it was built to find and kill, the covetousness, the single soul reaching, and he opened himself to it without reservation because there was nothing there to find. Because every chamber of him that might have wanted a throne for himself had been given, years ago, to a girl with frizzy hair and a chipped blue cup, and the proving passed through the place where that wanting should have been and found only her, and found in her, looking back, only him. The call went out across Britain. The bound felt it wherever they stood, and the histories were true. They came, not in body, all of them, but in presence, 1,000 threads of awareness drawn to the hall, the magic of a whole country bending to witness, and out of the deep stone of the foundation rose the echoes, the old dead, the founders' shapes in light, 4 tall presences Harry knew without being told, a lion and a serpent and a badger and an eagle worn as crowns, and behind them and over them all a 5th, spare and quick, with a clipped gray beard and ink on his painted cuffs made real for one moment in light, Meodin Wilt, the Hollow King, looking down at the 2 children who had passed his last test, and the painted piece Harry had seen in the library was on his face made enormous. "It is done," the old voice said, and the whole hall heard it now, not Harry alone, the dry, amused, 1,000-year voice rolling through 200 witnesses and a chief warlock and a minister for magic and a block of old families gone white to their expensive collars. 1,000 years I hollowed the seat and waited, and the land has weighed these 2, heart and mind, and found no lie in them and no single hunger, and so I give back what I took. Rise, the heirs of Merlin, not one above the world. 2 within it, for it bound to it, as I should have been and was too proud to be. The convocation wakes. Let any soul in Britain who would deny these 2 say so now, to the land and to me. No one said anything. Lucius Malfoy stood at the front of his block with his mouth open and no sound in it, and Cornelius Fudge had gripped the edge of his box, and the press had stopped writing because no quill could keep up with the thing the whole country was feeling at once, and high in the chief warlock's chair Albus Dumbledore sat very still, an old man watching a power he had spent a lifetime keeping asleep wakefully for 2 children he had tried with great kindness to manage. And on his face was a thing Harry had never seen there before and would remember for the rest of his life, which was awe, undefended, the awe of a wizard great enough to recognize something greater. The light gathered and folded, the way it had in the hall beneath the castle, drawing back down into the foundation, and the founders' echoes thinned and went, and Merlin's painted shape inclined its head once to the 2 of them. a master's last bow, and was gone, and the cord faded out of 200 wands and left a silence so total that Harry could hear his own pulse and Hermione's hand in his, and very far off, a single bird outside the high windows beginning uncertainly to sing. The 2 stone seats remained. That was the thing no one in that hall would ever be able to argue away afterward. Grown straight out of the floor of the Founders' Hall, side by side, 2 an equal pale stone shot through with veins of silver that pulsed faintly with the same light as the marks under the heirs' skins. The throne of the seat of Avalon stood where 300 years of empty ceremony had stood, and it would not unmake, and it had 2 seats, and there was no higher chair in the room than the one the 2 of them had risen from hand in hand. For a moment the hall held its breath, and into that moment Lucius Malfoy threw the last of his ruined strategy, because a man who has staked everything cannot simply sit down. "This is mummery," he said, but his voice cracked on it. "Theatrics, old magic conjured to overawe honest wizards. I demand the Wisengamot proceed to a lawful, Mr. Malfoy." Hermione did not raise her voice. She did not have to. The hall had learned in the last few minutes what her voice meant. "The land just decided. You felt it in your own wand. 200 people felt it. You are welcome to vote against the foundation of Britain, but I would think very carefully, in front of this many witnesses and this many quills, about being the one who stood up after a 1,000-year-old proving and called the country a liar because the answer was inconvenient to your blood." She let that sit, and then she did the thing that Harry understood, watching her, was the whole of what Merlin had spent 500 years in a frame waiting to see. She did not press the advantage. "But you needn't worry about what we mean to do with it, which is the question all of you are actually afraid of. So let me answer it, since we hold the convocation and could, in this hour, command anything of any of you and bind it. Here is what we command." She looked round the tiered benches at the most powerful people in Britain gone silent and afraid of 2 teenagers. "Nothing." The word dropped into the hall like a stone into a deep well. "We will not dissolve the Wisengamot," Hermione said. "We will not seize the ministry, or abolish your offices, or settle our scores, or any of the 1,000 things you have lain awake imagining since you heard the word heir. The seat was hollowed precisely so that no 2 people could be trusted to rule you, including us, and we believe that, because the wizard who built it was wiser than our wanting." She drew breath. "We claim it for one reason only, and we will say it plainly so the quills get it right. We claim it so that no one, not the old families, not the ministry, not the wizard whose name you will not say, can ever again decide in a back room which children get to exist and which are too low-born to be allowed their own magic. The motion to bind me under the act is void. The proving has answered it. The premise of this entire sitting, that blood decides worth, has been weighed by the land and found to be a lie. That is the only decree we will make today. We are not here to rule you. We are here so that you cannot rule the smallest of us out of being. The convocation is adjourned." She sat in the right-hand seat of the throne that had grown from the floor, and Harry sat in the left, and the act of 2 15-year-olds quietly sitting down was, somehow, the most authoritative thing that had happened in the Founders' Hall in 300 years. It was then that Dumbledore came down from the Chief Warlock's chair. He came alone, slowly, an old man crossing a stone floor, and he stopped before the 2 of them on their impossible throne and looked at them, and the whole hall watched the most powerful wizard of the age stand before 2 children he had failed to manage. When he spoke, it was low for the 3 of them, though everyone strained to hear. "I have made many calculations in my life," Dumbledore said, "and I have been wrong in very few of them, and I find that I was wrong in the one that mattered most. I thought you needed protecting from this. I see now that you needed only to be trusted with it, and that I, who have asked the world to trust me with every dangerous thing for 90 years, could not find it in myself to trust 2 children with their own inheritance." His blue eyes were wet. "There is a great deal I have kept from you, Harry, for reasons I believed were kind. I begin to suspect that my kindness and my control have worn the same face for so long that even I can no longer tell them apart. I will not insult you on this day of all days by pretending the keeping was only ever for your sake." He inclined his head to both of them, the bow of a king to something that outranked him. "You will want the truths I have been holding. You have earned them and more. Come to me when you are ready, not as a headmaster summoning a student, but as I should have spoken to you long ago, as an old man to the heirs of Merlin, with no more cards beneath the table." "Will come, sir," Harry said, and this time he meant the promise as well as the courtesy, because the old wizard had at last set down the worm with the hook in it and offered his open hand, and that was worth meeting. "Together, the way we do everything." "Yes," Dumbledore said, and the ghost of his old twinkle returned, tired and true. "I rather think that is the entire lesson, isn't it? The one I spent a lifetime too proud to learn." He turned to the assembled Wisengamot, drew himself up, and in the voice that had ordered Britain for half a century declared the sitting closed, and the spell of the moment broke into uproar, 200 witches and wizards and a wall of reporters all trying to leave and stay and shout at once. And in the middle of the uproar, Harry's scar split open with cold. It was not the hot, familiar ache. It was cold, a spike of January driven through the old curse scar into his skull, and for one heartbeat the bright loud hall was gone and he stood somewhere dark and far away, in a half-built body in a high-cold room, looking out through eyes that were not his at nothing, and a voice that had no warmth left anywhere, and it spoke into the dark, not to Harry, not knowing yet that Harry could hear, speaking to itself the way the very powerful speak when they are alone. So, it wakes. The old throne wakes that not even I could take, and it gives itself to a child, to him of all the souls in Britain. The voice turned the thought over with a hatred so vast and so patient it had become almost gentle. Then I will not take the throne. I will take the child who holds it and the girl, and when they are mine the throne is mine, and there will be no second seat to lock me out, because I will leave only one of them alive. The cold withdrew, and Harry was back on the stone seat with Hermione's hand crushing his and her face close and frightened, and the whole loud hall around them none the wiser, and he understood that the proving had not only crowned them. It had rung a bell that the darkest thing in Britain had been waiting a long time to hear. They did not get a moment to themselves for hours. There were orators to manage the crowd, and a frantic Fudge wanting assurances, and a swarm of reporters held back by McGonagall with the particular ferocity of a woman who had waited 40 years to put certain people in their place, and Ron and Ginny, and the whole red-headed clan of Weasleys closing around the two of them like a wall of warmth that no ministry official dared to breach. Mrs. Weasley got to them first, of course, and she did not say anything clever or political. She simply gathered both of them in, marks and thrones and convocations and all, and said into Harry's hair, "There now. There now. You did it standing up, the pair of you, and your mother would be so proud she'd frighten people." And Harry held on to her and let the day finally be too much for exactly as long as she held him, which was exactly long enough. The owls began before they had even left the Founders' Hall, and they did not stop for a week. Most of the wizarding world wrote to be near a thing it did not understand, but a thread of the letters was different, and Hermione read those ones aloud in the alcove with a catch in her voice she did not try to hide. A mother in Manchester whose muggle-born daughter had been turned away from an apprenticeship the year before, writing only to say thank you, you stood up and now she will not have to. A second-year named Dennis who had been hexed in a corridor for his blood and had stopped telling anyone, writing to ask shyly whether it was really true that the land itself had said his kind were not less. A grandfather who had been bound under an older version of the same act Lucius had tried to use on Hermione, 60 years gone, writing in a shaking hand that he had lived long enough to see it called a lie by Merlin's own throne, and that he could die now without that particular weight. "This is why," Hermione said, folding the grandfather's letter very carefully and setting it with the one she was keeping. "When it gets bad, and it's going to get worse than the stare, worse than anything, I want us to remember this is what we claimed it for. Not the throne, not to outrank the headmaster or beat Lucius Malfoy. For Dennis, who stopped telling anyone. We turned on all the lights so the smallest of them wouldn't have to hide in the dark, and the dark noticed, and now it's coming for us. That's the whole bargain. I'd make it again tonight." "So would I," Harry said, and meant it down to the marrow, and understood that whatever the high, cold voice was planning, it had already lost something it would never get back, because 2 children had stood up in front of the country, and a frightened second year had read about it and decided to keep telling someone. It was past midnight before he and Hermione climbed the moving stairs to the 4th floor and slipped behind the tapestry of Marithel, who regarded the 2 newly crowned heirs of Merlin with precisely the same long-suffering patience she had given a lonely 12-year-old setting out a candle, and that ordinariness was the most welcome thing in the world. The alcove was just as they had left it that morning. The kettle, the 4 cups, the slate, wiped clean. Hermione filled the blue cup and the white one out of old habit, and they sat in their places, and for a while neither of them said anything at all, because some days you have to let the silence catch up with you. "You went away," Hermione said finally, "in the hall at the end, your scar. I felt your hand go cold and you weren't there, your eyes weren't there for about 3 seconds, and then you came back white as the throne. I didn't say anything because the whole world was watching." She wrapped both hands round the white cup. "Tell me the whole of it, not the safe version. We don't do the safe version, you and me." So he told her. The cold room, the half-built body, the voice with no warmth left in it, and the thing it had decided that it would not reach for the throne it could not hold but for the 2 who held it, and that when it had them it would leave only one alive because one heir was an heir it could break. He watched her take it in, the worst possible news, the one threat aimed at the one thing neither of them could survive losing, and he watched her be afraid of it properly as she let herself be afraid of real things, and then he watched her do what she always did with fear, which was to take it apart until it was only a problem. "He's worked out the lock," she said slowly. "Same as Greaves, but he understands it better because of course he does. He knows he can't take the seat. He knows too as one shuts him out by its nature, a man who's done to his own soul whatever it is he's done. So he's going to try to do what the book tried, separate us, take us both and kill one, or turn one, or break the bond some other way, because the only thing in the world that can lock him out of the highest power in Britain is the fact that you and I would rather die than reach for it without each other." She set down the cup. Her hand was not quite steady, and she let him see that it was not, which from Hermione was its own kind of trust. Harry, the thing that makes us the heirs is the same thing he's going to aim at. The bond is the lock and the bond is the weakness, both at once. He's going to come at the us. Then we make the us the strongest thing in Britain, Harry said. Stronger than the throne. We've spent 4 years being careful with it. Now we stop being careful and start being good at it. Whatever he tries, separating us, taking one of us, he finds out the hard way what Merlin found out, that two who choose each other every single day are not a thing you can break by force. She looked at him across the candle, and something in her face was different tonight. In the small hours after a country had bowed to them, older and more fragile and more certain all at once, and the warmth under Harry's breastbone reached toward her and found her reaching back, and for a moment that had nothing to do with thrones or convocations or the dark thing in the high cold room, the two of them simply looked at each other, 15 and 16 years old. In a corridor that was the only place either of them had ever fully belonged, and the looking went on a beat longer than it had ever gone before, and something that had been growing under the friendship for 4 quiet years lifted its head, unhurried, unspoken, and was acknowledged by both of them without a single word, and set gently aside for now, for later, because they were young and there was a war coming, and some things you keep safe by not yet saying them. Mind and heart, Hermione said softly, and it meant what it had always meant, and also tonight a little more. Mind and heart, said Harry. Outside the alcove the castle was wide awake now, every stone of it alight with the same banked silver that pulsed under their skins, and far below the east towers 2 seats of pale stone stood in the Founders' Hall where no power in Britain could unmake them, and across the country the old places murmured to one another in a language older than the statute that the Hollow King's throne had 2 on it at last. They were crowned. The whole world knew their names. And somewhere in a high cold room, a patient ancient hatred was already drawing its plans against the only thing that stood between it and everything, which was a boy and a girl, and the space between them that they would now have to defend with their lives. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The grandfather's gambit. The winter that followed the convocation was the winter the war came out of its hiding, and it came because the thing in the high cold room had stopped being a voice in Harry's scar and become, once again, a body in the world. They never learned every detail of how it was done, the stolen ritual, the bone and the blood in the servant's hand, but by Christmas the dark mark had returned to the forearms of the old family's worst sons, and the prophet had stopped pretending, and the name no one would say was being whispered again in the corridors of the ministry that had spent a year calling Harry a liar for warning them. The world Harry had grown up in, the one that ran on fear with the occasional shout, was coming back, and he found that the alcove behind Marithal had become not only a refuge now, but a war room. They went to Dumbledore in January, the 2 of them together, because he had asked them to, and because the time had come to collect what he owed. The office was the same warm gold it had always been, the instruments ticking their restored double beat, Fawkes burning low on his perch, but the wizard behind the desk was different than he had been even 3 months before, older, the great hands not quite steady, and there was a blackened ruin where his right hand should have been, the fingers dead and shriveled that he had stopped troubling to hide. Sit, Dumbledore said. Both of you, and forgive an old man his slowness. I am dying, you see, and it makes one sentimental. He said it the way another person might mention rain. No, do not look like that, Harry. It is not your doing nor anything that can be undone. I was careless with a cursed object some months ago, reached for a thing I should have left in the dark, and the curse is in my blood and will have me by the summer. Severus has bought me a year. I tell you not for sympathy, but because a dying man has finally run out of reasons to manage anyone, and I find it a great relief. You came for the truth. For once in my life I have nothing left to gain by shading it. Ask. So Hermione asked, in her steady scientist's voice, the word McGonagall had given them 2 years before. The prophecy, she said. Tell us about the prophecy. Dumbledore closed his eyes, and when he opened them he told them, and Harry listened to the words that had decided his life before he could walk. The child born as the 7th month died. The power the Dark Lord knew not. Either must die at the hand of the other. Neither can live while the other survives. He had half known it for years, the shape of it, the way you half know a thing that lives in the next room. Hearing it said plainly was different. It was the sound of a door he had always felt at his back finally being named. He chose you, Dumbledore said. Of the 2 children it might have meant he chose you, marked you as his equal, and in the choosing gave you the very thing the prophecy promised, a power he does not understand. I believed for many years that the power was love, the thing your mother left in your skin the night she died, and I was not wrong, but I was, it seems, insufficiently imaginative. His ruined gaze moved to their joined hands on the desk, the silver faintly visible. I did not foresee that the power he knows not would turn out to be a second chair. I did not foresee you, Miss Granger. I confess it has rearranged a great deal of my thinking, and at the very end of my life, which is an undignified time to have one's certainties rearranged. There's more, Harry said. You said no cards under the table. The scar isn't just a scar. It does things a cursed scar shouldn't. I've felt him through it my whole life. Tell me what it is. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment, and the room ticked around them, and Fox made his low not-quite song, and at last the old wizard told them the thing he had carried alone for years, the thing that was the worst of it, and he told it without flinching because dying men do not flinch. He told them what a Horcrux was, the splitting of a soul by murder, the anchoring of a torn fragment in an object so that the maker cannot truly die while it survives. He told them that the thing in the high cold room had made not one but many, had rent its soul into pieces and scattered them, which was why it had not died the night it tried to kill a baby and met a mother's love instead. And he told them in a voice gone very gentle what had happened that night to the last fragment, the piece that had nowhere to go when the body that made it was destroyed. It latched onto the only living thing in the room, Dumbledore said. You, Harry, you have carried a shard of his soul behind that scar since you were 15 months old. It is how you speak to snakes. It is how you feel his moods. It is why your scar burns when he is near or angry. There is a piece of him in you, and it has been there your whole life, and it cannot simply be cut out, because the binding that holds it to you. The office was very still. Harry was aware of Hermione's hand in his, gone tight, and of the warmth banked under his breastbone, which had not flickered, which sat in him steady as it had since he was 13. And he found that the news did not undo him the way it would have undone the lonely child who came to this castle at 11, because that lonely child had thought himself nothing, and Harry knew now exactly what he was and whose he was, and it was not Voldemort's. Say the rest of it, Hermione said quietly. She had gone pale, and her voice was level in the particular way that meant she had seen the conclusion 3 steps ahead, and needed to hear him confirm it before she would let herself believe a man could plan such a thing. If the fragment is bound to Harry and it has to be destroyed for Voldemort to be mortal, then you've spent his whole life thinking Harry has to die. Haven't you? That's the plan. That's the thing under all the other things. You raised him, you kept him alive, you let him love people, so that when the moment came he would walk to his own death and take the last piece of Voldemort with him. Dumbledore did not look away. To his eternal credit in Harry's memory of that hour, he did not look away. Yes, he said, that was the plan. I have known since you were 11 that there would likely come a day when you would have to let him kill you, so that the fragment in you would die and he could at last be ended. I told myself it was necessary. It was necessary. I told myself a great many beautiful true things, and underneath all of them I was raising a child to the slaughter and teaching him to love the world so that he would be willing to die for it. There's a word for what I have been doing to you, Harry, and it is not a kind one, and I have had a great deal of time lately to learn to say it to myself in the dark. His dead hand lay on the desk like a thing that did not belong to him. I am the architect of your death. I built it carefully over 15 years, and I built it out of love, which is the part I can no longer make peace with, that the love was real, and the using of it was also real, and I could never afford to let myself feel the difference. Harry sat with the worst thing anyone had ever told him, and waited to feel the betrayal he had every right to, and found instead a strange cold clarity because the plan Dumbledore had just confessed had one enormous flaw in it, and Hermione beside him had already found the same flaw. He could feel her finding it, the two of them arriving at it together the way they arrived at everything. It's a plan for one, Harry said, sir. Your whole plan, 15 years of it, it's built for a Harry who's alone, a boy who walks into the forest by himself and lets it happen because there's no one to walk in with him and nothing in the world strong enough to pull him back. That's the Harry you raised, that's not the Harry that's sitting here. He looked at Hermione and back at the dying wizard. You said it yourself. You didn't foresee the second chair. You built a death for one, and there aren't one of us. There's two. It was here that Dumbledore made his last attempt to steer them, and Harry understood afterward that the old wizard had not even meant it as manipulation, that it had simply been the deepest groove his mind had worn in 90 years, and he had slid into it the way water finds the low place. He leaned forward, and the concern on his face was real, and he said, "Then let me protect what you have, since I cannot any longer protect you. Listen to me, both of you. He has told you through the scar exactly what he means to do. He means to take you both and kill one. Your bond is the only thing that locks him out of the seat, and it is therefore the only thing he must destroy, and as long as you are together, you are a single target he can take in a single stroke, so separate. Hide Miss Granger where even I do not know the place, keep her out of the war and out of his reach, and let Harry remain the public heir, the face of it, the bait. Preserve the bond by putting the country between its halves. It is the coldest advice I have ever given, and it is, I am nearly certain, the correct one. I have run the arithmetic 1,000 times. 2 together is a target, 2 apart is a secret he cannot solve." And Harry felt Hermione go rigid beside him, and he knew without looking that her face had done the cold, clear thing, and he let her answer it because this one was hers to answer. "No," Hermione said. "And I want to be precise about why, because you're not wrong about the arithmetic, Professor. You're wrong about the thing the arithmetic is made of." She had not raised her voice. "You've just described Voldemort's exact strategy and recommended we do it to ourselves. He wants us separated. Separation is the whole of his plan. He just intends to achieve it with a curse, and you propose to achieve it with a hiding place. and the result he wants and the result you want are the same result, two halves of one thing kept apart. You think you'd be preserving the bond, you'd be doing to it precisely what he's trying to do, only gently, and calling it protection, because that is the only way you have ever known how to love anyone. She let that land, and then she softened it, because she was fierce, but she was not cruel. The bond isn't a thing we have that we could put in a vault for safekeeping. It's a thing we do, every day. It survives by being used, by being together, by choosing each other over and over in the open where it can grow. Lock half of it in a hidden place and starve it of the other half, and it doesn't stay safe, it dies of the safety. You'd hand him the victory and wrap it in kindness, and that, professor, with great respect, is the single most Dumbledore thing I have ever heard. The silence after that was total. And then Albus Dumbledore, the greatest wizard of the age, the architect of a boy's death, began very quietly to laugh, a broken and astonished sound, and there were tears in it. The single most Dumbledore thing she has ever heard, he repeated. Oh, that is fair. That is entirely fair, and no one has dared say it to me in 50 years, and it has taken a 16-year-old daughter of dentists to do it on the day I told her I am dying. You are quite right, Miss Granger. I would have called it protection to the end and never once felt the lie. He wiped his face with his living hand. Tell me the rest of it, then. You have not only refused my plan, you have a better one. I can see it on the two of you. You have been building it since I said the word Horcrux. Tell me. So they told him, and the telling was the first time Harry had said it out loud, and it had come to him and to Hermione both in the same instant somewhere in the last terrible quarter of an hour, the way the answers always came to them, mind and heart finding the shape of it from opposite sides. Merlin's magic is whole soul magic, Hermione said. It's the opposite of what Voldemort did to himself. The whole point of the seat, the reason a torn soul can't hold it, is that it's founded on wholeness, on two made one. We've spent 4 years learning to pour the bond into the world as power, so we don't send Harry into a forest to die alone to kill the fragment. We use the seat, we use the two as one. If the fragment can be severed from him while something holds him whole, holds him to himself, to life, to me, then the shard dies and Harry doesn't, because the binding that the fragment uses to stay, the binding to a living thing, gets answered by a stronger binding, one it can't pick, the same one that locks Voldemort out of the throne. She gripped Harry's hand. It's not certain, it's theory. Merlin's portrait thinks it can be done and won't promise it, but it's a plan for two. It's a way through that your plan for one never had, because your plan for one had no one standing in the doorway holding him to the world, and we have spent 4 years learning to be exactly that for each other. Dumbledore looked at them for a long time, and the thing on his face was the same thing that had been on it in the Founder's Hall, the undefended awe of a great wizard recognizing something greater, and then he did the thing that made Harry in the end forgive him almost everything. He pushed back his chair and he stood, swaying on his dying legs, and he inclined his head to the two of them as low as his ruined body would bend. Then I have been planning the wrong war, he said, and I am very glad to have learned it before the end. Everything I have, the order, the secrets, the network of a lifetime, every card I have ever held beneath every table, it is yours from this hour, not to be managed by me, but to be commanded by you. I have spent 90 years being the one who knew best. It is the strangest relief of my life to hand that to 2 children and discover that they do, in fact, know better. Tell me where to stand, I will stand there. The answer to where Dumbledore should stand came 3 weeks later in Hogsmeade on a bright cold Saturday, and it came in fire. They had known an attack would come. The only questions had been where and how badly, and the Order had layered the village with quiet protections that February, watchers in the 3 broomsticks, Aurors in plain robes, a portkey sewn into the lining of Hermione's coat that Harry had checked twice that morning. None of it was enough because the thing in the high cold room had stopped caring about subtlety, and it had worked out, exactly as it had told the dark through Harry's scar, that it did not need the throne if it had the 2 who held it. So it sent a dozen of its worst to a village full of children, not to win a battle, but to reach into the crowd and take a girl. The first Harry knew of it was the warmth under his breastbone going to ice, the old warning, half a second before the front of Zonko's came apart in green fire and the screaming started. Then there was no time, only the shapes coming out of the smoke in silver masks and the village full of younger students scattering, and at the center of it, cutting toward Hermione through the panic with a focus that the random cruelty around her did not have, Bellatrix Lestrange, who had been sent for one thing and meant to have it. What followed Harry never fully ordered into sequence afterward, because it happened all at once the way real violence does. He got to Hermione's side, and their hands found each other in the smoke, roots to wings, and the air magic woke between them and threw the first 3 Death Eaters off their feet with a wall of hard air that cracked the cobbles. The Order came out of its hiding places, Tonks and Kingsley and Lupin, and grey and dying and utterly unhurried, Dumbledore, who walked into a street full of curses as if into his own garden and turned aside 3 killing curses with a flick of his living hand while the village fled behind him. Ron and Ginny had their wands out and their backs to the heirs, the DA's months of drilling holding under fire. For a moment it was a battle and they were winning it. Then the snake came. It came low and fast out of the smoke, vast, longer than a man, and it did not go for Harry or Hermione. It went for the wall of red-headed Weasleys who had put themselves between the Death Eaters and the younger children, and it took Arthur Weasley across the chest and throat before anyone saw it move, and the sound Molly made somewhere behind the lines was a sound out of the oldest part of the world. And in the instant the snake struck, Harry's scar tore open with cold, and through the cold he felt it, unmistakable, the same wrongness that lived behind his own eyes, the same torn and anchored thing, and he understood with a certainty that had no logic under it and needed none that the snake was not a snake. It was a piece of Voldemort's soul-wearing scales, one of the scattered fragments, hunting inside a body it had made its own. The snake, Harry shouted over the fire to Hermione, to Dumbledore, to anyone. The snake is one of them, it's a Horcrux, it's him. And Bellatrix, seeing the heir's attention split, lunged the last yards for Hermione with a triumphant shriek, and her hand closed on Hermione's arm, and a portkey of her own flared to life to drag the girl away into the dark to her master. It did not take her. Harry would remember to the end of his life that it did not take her, and why. Because Hermione, even in the grip of the woman sent to steal her, even with the portkey already pulling at the world, did not panic and did not reach for an escape. She reached for him. Her marked hand found Harry's across the closing gap, wings to roots, and the two as one woke at full force for the first time in open war, and the seat's old power poured up out of the ground of a village 1,000 years old, and answered the only thing it had ever answered, which was the two of them choosing each other, and it took Bellatrix Lestrange's stolen portkey and her stolen certainty and her grip on the girl, and unmade all three at once. Blasting the Death Eater backward down the burning street with her arm broken and her mask cracked and a look on her face that Harry had never seen on a servant of the dark before, which was fear, real fear, the fear of someone who has reached into what she was told was a fire and found it was a sun. The Death Eaters broke after that. They had been sent to take a girl from a frightened crowd, not to fight a sun in a village street, and when their portkeys failed and their best fell and the air stood untaken and blazing in the smoke, they fled the way cruelty always flees when it stops being cheap all at once, leaving their wounded. The snake went with them, pouring back into the dark, and Harry's scar cooled, and the immediate war was over, and the long one had only properly begun. Arthur Weasley was dying on the cobbles. Hermione was on her knees beside him before the last Death Eater had gone, her wand already moving in the patterns she had taught herself, the same patterns that had held Ron together on a stair 2 years before, and she was saying numbers and saying them steady, while Molly held her husband's gray face and the children stood in a ring of held breath around their father. The bite was bad, the venom worse, something in it that fought the healing the way nothing natural fought it, and Harry, kneeling, took Arthur's cold hand and did the only thing he had, which was to reach for the warmth under his breastbone and pour it deliberately into Arthur, not a spell, just the old whole-soul warmth of the seat, the opposite of the torn and poisoning thing the snake had left, and he felt it push back the cold an inch, and then another, buying the minutes that Hermione's wand needed. "He's holding," Hermione said, her voice cracking on the last word. "I can't heal it, this isn't a wound, it's a curse-riding venom, I can only slow it, we need St. Mungo's, we need them now." And Dumbledore was already there, dying himself, conjuring a stretcher and a portkey and the calm authority that 50 years had made into a reflex, and in a moment Arthur and Molly and the worst of the wounded were gone in a tug of magic to the one place that might save him, and the bright cold Saturday in Hogsmeade was suddenly only smoke and weeping children. And the smell of green fire and a village that had learned the hard way what it cost to stand next to the heirs of Merlin. He lived, that was the mercy they were granted, that February, the one they had not earned and did not question. Arthur Weasley lived 3 days on the edge of it at St. Mungo's while the curse fought the healers and the healers, armed with what Hermione had learned of the venom and what Dumbledore knew of the snake, fought it back, and on the 4th day he woke and asked for tea and complained about the hospital food, and Molly cried, and the whole red-headed clan crammed into a ward built for 4 and refused to leave. And Harry stood in the doorway of all that noisy, relieved love and felt the cost of the day settle into him properly for the first time. It was Ron who said it in the corridor outside, away from his mother's hearing. He had not slept in 3 days and it showed, and the scar on his shoulder from the last attack was a white line above his collar, and he looked at Harry with none of the easy humor he wore like armor. "He almost died because of us," Ron said. "It was not an accusation. That was what made it terrible, Dad, because he stood next to us, because we're your family and your family's the thing they reach for now." He scrubbed his face. "I'm not saying I'd change it. I swore in that corridor and I meant it and I'd swear it again tonight, but I need you to know what it is we're doing, Harry. We turned on all the lights and the moths that came aren't moths. Every person who loves you is a door he can come through. That's the price of being too bright to murder quietly. The brightness is also a beacon." He met Harry's eyes. "I still think it's worth it. I just don't want either of you ever pretending it's free." It was while Arthur lay healing at St. Mungo's that Draco Malfoy found Harry alone, which had not happened in 7 years and did not happen by accident. He was waiting in an empty classroom off the hospital wing corridor, and he looked, Harry thought, like a person who had not slept since Hogsmeade, the polished sneer gone, something raw underneath it that Harry recognized because he had seen its cousin on Ron years ago, the look of a boy beginning to understand that the script he had been handed would get him killed. "My father isn't well," Draco said with no preamble, his voice low and fast, watching the door. "Since Hogsmeade. Since the two of you broke the Lestrange woman's portkey in front of everyone and she went back to him with a cracked mask and nothing to show for it. The Dark Lord doesn't forgive that. He's in our house, Potter, did you know that? He lives in my house now, and he's punishing the families who promised him a quick war and gave him a year of the Heirs of Merlin, making him look afraid." He was shaking, very slightly. "They told us, all of us, the whole of the old blood, that the natural order was coming back. That we'd be on top again where we belonged and the mudbloods would learn their place. And instead there's a thing under your skin that the land itself bowed to, and a girl my aunt couldn't drag 2 feet because you reached for each other, and now the people who promised us everything are torturing my mother in her own drawing room because the future they sold us isn't coming." Harry did not move toward him, and did not move away, and let the silence be the thing that asked the question. "I'm not asking to be your friend," Draco said, with a ghost of the old contempt mostly aimed at himself now. "I'd choke on it, but I've spent my whole life being told blood was the only thing that was real, and I watched a 1,000-year-old throne call that a lie in front of my father, and I can't unsee it, and I'm not going to die for men who'd feed my mother to a snake to make a point. So," pulled something from his robes, a folded parchment, and set it on the nearest desk and stepped back from it as though it might burn. "Names, the families he's actually got, the ones only pretending, where the cowards will break. It's the only thing I have that's worth anything to people like you. I'm not choosing your side, I'm choosing my mother, but if those happen to be the same direction for a while, then they're the same direction." He went to the door and paused and did not look back. She was right, Granger. "In the corridor in second year, she said a thing that breaks when you grab it isn't a thing you send a child to grab. My father sent a great many children to grab it. I'm just the first one clever enough to be frightened. Tell her I said she was right. Don't tell her I said anything else." He left, and Harry stood in the empty classroom with a list of fracture lines in the enemy's own hand, and understood that the brightness Ron had warned him of did not only draw moths. It also sometimes showed the moths what they were flying into, and gave the cleverest of them a reason to turn back, and that this too was a kind of magic. The men with the gold had never learned to fight, the slow defection of the people they had been so sure they owned. The War Council met that night in the Hollow King's library, because it was the one room in Britain that no enemy could enter and no spy could find, and Harry brought Dumbledore down the hidden stair for the first time, and watched the greatest wizard of the age stand in Merlin's workshop and look up at the portrait of the Hollow King with the expression of a lifelong scholar meeting the author of his favorite book. Merlin's painted eyes moved over the dying wizard with frank assessment. "So you are Albus," the portrait said, "the hero who beat Grindelwald and then spent 60 years afraid of his own strength. I have heard you talk to my heirs through the castle for years, old man, steering them the way I steered kings. We are a type, you and I. It is not a compliment." And Dumbledore, to his credit, bowed to the painting and said, "No, it is a diagnosis. I have lately been cured of it by a girl with a chipped blue cup." And Merlin laughed his dry 1,000-year laugh, and the two old steerers of the world understood each other completely. They named the enemy's soul on the scarred table that night, all of it, everything Dumbledore knew and had hunted alone for years. Voldemort had made his soul into pieces, and the pieces were hidden in objects he had chosen for their meaning, the relics of the founders, the trophies of his pride. Some Dumbledore had already found and destroyed at the cost of his hand and his life. Others remained, and now there was the snake, which Harry's scar had confirmed beyond doubt, a fragment that did not hide in a vault but hunted at its master's side, the hardest of all to reach. And there was the last one, the one they did not name out loud at first, the piece behind Harry's own scar, the shard that made the whole grim arithmetic close. "We have the shape of it now," Hermione said, and she had the slate propped on Merlin's table, the old habit, the war reduced to a list because a list was a thing you could finish. "Find the fragments, destroy them, every one, until the only piece of him left in the world is the piece in Harry. Then and only then we do the thing no one has ever done. We sever that last shard with the two as one, the whole soul magic, while I hold him to life, and we leave Voldemort a single mortal soul in a single mortal body, lockable, killable, finished." She set down the chalk. "It's a hunt and a siege and a severance, and any one of them could kill us, and we're going to do all three, but we know the road now. He spent years making sure no one could ever map his soul, and he's just spent a Saturday in Hogsmeade teaching us to read it." "You left out the part you do not like," Dumbledore said gently from across the table. "The severance is unproven. If it fails, Harry dies after all, exactly as I planned, only with you holding his hand instead of a forest holding his body. You are wagering everything on a theory." "Yes," Hermione said, "we are. Because your certainty was a plan to kill him and our theory is a plan to save him, and I will take a theory that tries over a certainty that surrenders every single time for the rest of my life." She did not look up from the slate. "And it isn't only a theory, it's the truest thing either of us has ever done made into magic. You of all people should understand that the impossible thing love can do is exactly the thing he knows not. We're not guessing, Professor. We're betting on the one power the prophecy already promised us." Dumbledore was quiet, and then he inclined his head, and there was peace on his ruined face. "Then I will spend what life I have left finding you the fragments," he said, "so that when the day comes, the only piece left to sever is the one that can be severed with love. It is a better use of a dying year than I had planned. Thank you, both of you, for giving an old architect a kinder thing to build." Merlin's portrait had listened to all of it from its frame without comment, which was unlike him, and when the slate was finally wiped and the candles guttering, the Hollow King spoke once more, to the three of them, in a register Harry had not heard from him before, stripped of the dry amusement. "I built the seat to keep a torn soul off a throne," he said. "I did not in 1,000 years of waiting imagine that the same wholeness might be turned the other way, to mend a soul a tearing had broken into instead of merely to bar it. If you are right, children, if the two as one can sever a shard and hold a boy to life across the wound of it, then you will have used my lock for a thing I never dreamed of, which is not to keep power out but to call a person back. That is better magic than I ever made. Go and be certain of it, because the proving in the Founder's Hall will be a kindness next to the night you attempt it, and certainty is the only wand that works in the dark you are walking into." Later, when the council had gone and the library had sealed itself behind Dumbledore's slow, careful steps, Harry and Hermione climbed up through the dark castle to the alcove out of an old need neither of them named, because some days could only end in the one place that was only theirs. Marithel watched them in, patient as ever. The kettle boiled, the blue cup and the white one steamed in the candlelight, and for a while they did not talk about Horcruxes or Severances or dying headmasters, because there was a thing standing in the room that was older than all of it, and they had been too busy surviving to look at it. "Her hand was on my arm," Hermione said finally into the steam. "Bellatrix, the portkey was already pulling." Another half-second and I'd have been gone, Harry, into the dark to him, and the next time either of us saw the other it would have been to watch one of us die in front of the other to break the bond. She was not crying. She had gone somewhere past crying, to the flat, steady place where she put the truths she could not afford to flinch from. I should have reached for the portkey in my coat, the train thing, the sensible escape. I didn't even think of it. I reached for you. With a Death Eater's hand on my arm and a portkey dragging me into hell, the only thought in my head was your hand. Where is his hand? And that's the only reason I'm sitting here, because the thing I did instead of saving myself was the thing that actually saved me." She looked up at him. "I need you to know that when it was the real edge of it, I didn't reach for the clever way out. I reached for you. I'll always reach for you. I think I should have told you that a long time ago and kept finding reasons not to." Harry put down the blue cup. His hand was not quite steady, and he let it not be because they did not do the safe version, the two of them. "I felt it," he said, "the reach, across the gap. I felt your hand find mine 100 times, but that one I felt in my teeth, like the cord the first night on this seat. You reaching for me instead of the door is the strongest magic I've ever stood inside, and I've stood inside a lot of it lately." He moved, without deciding to, around the little table, so that he was beside her on the window seat where the whole of it had started, close, the way they had not let themselves sit close in a long while, because of the thing it would admit. "Hermione, I'm going to say a thing and then I'm going to not finish it, and I need you to let me not finish it, because we're 16 and there's a war and the timing is wrong, and I will not start the most important conversation of my life on the night your second father nearly died on the cobbles." "All right," she said very quietly, and she did not move away, which was its own answer. "There's a word," Harry said. "You said it on this seat when we were 13. Said best friend isn't big enough and there should be a word, and I gave you mind and heart, and it was true. It's still true. It's the truest thing I have. But it isn't the whole of the word anymore and hasn't been for a while, and I think you know that, and I think you've known it longer than I have because you know everything longer than I do." He turned his marked hand over and she laid her wing-veined one in it, roots to wings, the oldest gesture they had. "So I'm not going to say the rest of it. Not tonight, maybe not until this is over and we're both still here to mean it without a war making it desperate. But I want you to know it's there, that it's been there, that when there's room in the world for it, there's a thing I'm going to finish saying to you, and it starts with mind and heart, and it goes a great deal further." She was quiet for a moment, and then she leaned slowly and put her forehead against his, the way you do when there are no words left that are safe to use. And they sat like that in the candlelight, 16 years old, foreheads together, marked hands laced, with a country crowned to them and a war coming for them, and a dying old man hunting fragments of a torn soul so that one day they might save each other. And the thing between them that had been rooting in the dark for 4 years lifted its head and was, at last, fully acknowledged by them both and held gently unfinished, kept safe the way they kept all their most precious things safe, by refusing to spend them before their time. When it's over, Hermione said against his forehead. It was not a question. It was a promise, filed in the place where she kept the things she intended to make true. When it's over, Harry agreed. The war ground on through another long year after that, the hunt and the hiding and the slow, terrible arithmetic of it, and by the summer at the end of it, both of them had turned 17 and come of age in the eyes of a world that had crowned them children. And the alliance was set, and the road was mapped, and the cost was counted and would go on being counted, and somewhere a torn soul in a stolen body was learning, slowly, that the two it had meant to break by force had instead grown stronger every time it reached for them. The war that was coming would be the worst thing any of them had ever lived through, but it would find them ready and together and of age, and that Harry thought, climbing the stairs to bed with the warmth banked steady under his breastbone, and a forehead's worth of certainty he would carry into every battle left, was a great deal more than the lonely architect of his death had ever planned for one boy to have. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Siege of Avalon's Gate. They hunted his soul across the longest summer of their lives, and they were 17 and of age, and had buried the question of what they were to each other under the work, because the work would not wait and the question would. Dumbledore led them to the fragments the way a dying cartographer leads explorers to the edges of his own map, and one by one the relics of the enemy's pride came apart in the Hollow King's library, on the scarred table, under the two-as-one that no protection the dark had laid on them could survive. There was a locket that had belonged to Slytherin, that whispered to whoever held it, that tried the old trick of the book in the proving and offered each of them a kingdom of one, and broke when they refused it together, screaming, the way they always screamed when they met two where they had been promised one. There was a cup of Hufflepuff's, gold and small and so heavy with hidden malice that it took both their hands and the whole warmth of the seat to unmake it. There was a diadem, Ravenclaw's lost crown, found at last in a room in the castle that only appeared to those who needed it, and a ring Dumbledore had already paid for with his hand, and each fragment they destroyed left the enemy a little more mortal and left them a little more tired, and left a little less of the summer. By August there were 2 pieces of Voldemort's soul left in all the world. One was the snake which never left his side, which Harry Scar could feel coiled in the dark of whatever house held him now, a knot of wrongness that hunted and ate and could not be reached without reaching the master first. And the other was the shard behind Harry's own scar, the last and the worst, the one that closed the arithmetic, the one they meant to sever with love on a night they both dreaded, and neither would speak aloud. He knows, Hermione said the last week of August, the slate between them showing the war reduced to its final terrible simplicity. He has to know by now. Every fragment we destroy he feels it die, the way Harry feels them through the scar. He's been feeling pieces of himself go out like candles all summer, and he's clever. He's worked out that it's us, and he's worked out that we're narrowing him down to the snake and to Harry, so he's not going to wait for us to come and finish it tidily. Set down the chalk. He's going to come to us, to the one place that holds everything he wants and everything he fears, the seat, the gate, the school. He's going to throw everything he has left at Hogwarts all at once to take the throne and take the 2 of us and end this before we can end him. And he's going to do it soon, because every day he waits he has fewer pieces and we have more allies. She looked up. The hunt's over, Harry, now it's the siege, and we don't get to choose the day. He does. He chose the 1st of September, the day the children were meant to come home to school, because cruelty of that order was not a flaw in him but a language, and at dusk, as the last of the early arrivals were settling into a castle the order had quietly emptied of all but its defenders, the wards of Hogwarts began, one after another, to fall. They had known the day was coming, if not which day, and the castle was as ready as a 1,000-year-old fortress with 2 living heirs could be made. Draco's parchment had been worth more than its weight in anything. The names on it had let the order strip the enemy's lies away one cowardly family at a time over the summer, so that the host now gathering in the dark beyond the gates was smaller than it would have been, and angrier, and stiffened with the few who were true believers, and the many who had been left no door but this one. Snatchers and werewolves under greyback giants on the far slopes, the Dementors pouring up the valley like spilled night, and at the heart of it, in a column of cold that put out the stars, the thing that had once been a man and was now mostly a wound walking, with the snake pouring along beside him and Bellatrix at his right hand, her mask mended, her hatred refreshed. Inside, the defenders took their places, and Harry stood on the steps of the great hall and watched the people he loved arrange themselves between his enemy and the children still being evacuated through the old passages, and the warmth banked under his breastbone was not steady now. It was burning. McGonagall had the school's own defenses in hand, the statues and the suits of armor rising at her command, the woman who had taught them all to become something more than they were now calling the castle itself to its feet. The Order held the doors. The Weasleys held the courtyard, Arthur on his feet again and grim, Molly with her wand out and a look that promised someone was going to regret Hogsmeade. Ron and Ginny stood at the heirs' backs where they had stood for years. Neville and Luna and the rest of the DA, of age now and unafraid in the particular way of young people who have decided a thing is worth more than their own safety, filled the gaps. And down in the dark beneath them all, behind the hawthorn door and below the Hollow King's library, Avalon's gate waited, the deepest threshold of Merlin's legacy, the thing Voldemort had truly come for, sealed by a lock he could not pick and meant to break by taking the only two hands that could open it. "He'll drive for the gate," Hermione said beside Harry on the steps, her voice carrying the cold clarity that battle gave her instead of fear. "Everything else is noise to fix us in place and bleed our people. The Dementors, the Giants, all of it, it's to keep us busy and frightened and spent while he cuts a path to the one door in Britain that matters. We can't let him fight the battle he wants. We have to make the castle fight for us, all of it, the way it did on the stair, the way it did in the Founders' Hall. We've spent 5 years learning to pour the two of us into the world. Tonight we pour it into the ground itself." So they did the thing they had practiced in secret all that last week, the thing Merlin's portrait had taught them at the cost of leaving him, for now, sealed and safe below. They went down to the worn seats in the hall beneath the castle, the first hall, the small one, the one that had woken for 2 13-year-olds, and they sat in it together as the wards fell above them and the screaming began, and they opened themselves to the seat, all the way, no caution left, and they gave the castle their hands. The waking that answered was nothing like the gentle recognition of that first night. This was 1,000 years of patience turned in an instant to wrath. Harry felt Hogwarts come awake under him to its deepest stone, felt the lake stir and the forest lean inward and the old places across all of Britain turn their ancient faces toward a school under assault, and he felt the sovereignty Ragnarok had named in a Gringotts vault become, for one night, a literal thing, the land itself acknowledging the two it had crowned and answering their need. The centaurs came out of the trees, who had never once fought a human war, because the heirs of Merlin had asked and the old law in their blood would not let them refuse. The merpeople rose in the shallows. The castle's stone deepened and hardened and grew teeth. And the Dementors, pouring up the valley toward a feast of frightened children, met a wall of silver-gold light that rose from the ground at the heir's will. The warmth of the seat made visible whole soul magic against so leading dark, and they broke against it and fled shrieking, because the one thing in the world a Dementor cannot abide is two people who would each rather die than lose the other, made into a fire the size of a castle. It was not a shield. Hermione had been precise about that in the planning, in the cold voice she used for the truths that cost something. They could not simply wall the enemy out. A wall could be besieged until the people inside it starved, and besides, the gate could only be defended in the end by the same two hands that could open it, which meant the two of them could not hide behind the light they raised. They had to walk into the battle wearing it. So they climbed back up out of the deep hall hand in hand, marked palms blazing, and they walked out of the doors of Hogwarts into the worst night of the war, 2 17-year-olds clothed in the answer of the land, and the host beyond the gates faltered at the sight of them, and somewhere in the cold column at the heart of the dark, a torn soul in a stolen body understood that taking the heirs of Merlin was going to cost more than it had been told. The battle, when it broke over the grounds, was the worst thing Harry had ever stood inside, and he had stood inside a great deal. It came in waves exactly as Hermione had read it, the giants first to shatter the gates and the ward's last remnants, then the masked tide pouring through the breach, then Greyback's pack loping low through the smoke, all of it aimed not truly at killing the defenders but at fixing them, at making so much horror in the courtyard that the two who mattered would have to spend themselves stopping it and never reach the gate in time to matter. The heirs did not fall for it, and that was Hermione's doing, her cold map of the night holding even as the night tried to drown it. They did not try to be everywhere. They held the center, the line between the breach and the doors, the road to the gate, and they made the holding of it terrible. Where they stood, the light of the seat stood with them, and Death Eaters who walked into it found their curses guttering and their certainty draining, and the old whole soul warmth fraying the torn dark magic the way warm water frays ice. Around them the defenders fought the war that could be fought with wands, McGonagall's stone soldiers grinding into the giants, the Order cutting the masked tide, the DA holding the flanks with a discipline that made Harry's chest ache to see, children he had taught in a secret room years ago now standing of age in the open and refusing to break. There were losses. He would not let himself look at all of them in the moment, because looking was what the enemy wanted, but he saw a stone gargoyle come down on Colin Creevey, who had been told to evacuate and had crept back to fight, and he saw Lupin go down under 2 wands and Tonks reach him and the two of them disappear into the smoke together, and he saw the courtyard fountain run with things that fountains should not run with. The cost Ron had warned him of in a hospital corridor was being paid in full in front of him, by people who had decided he was worth it, and the only thing Harry could do with the unbearable weight of that was to make their decision worth the making, to hold the line so hard that the brightness they had all chosen to stand in did not gutter. The old world fought beside them, and Harry would carry the sight of it the rest of his life. The centaurs came down off the slopes in a thunder of hooves and loosed arrows into the masked tide. Bane and Ronan, and the whole herd that had held themselves apart from human quarrels for 1,000 years, fighting now because the heirs of Merlin had asked, and the deep law in their blood would not let them say no to the seat. Out in the black water of the lake, the merpeople rose and dragged screaming snatchers down off the causeway. Hagrid came roaring out of his ruined hut with the great boarhound at his heels and a giant's strength in his arms, scattering werewolves like a man wading through dogs, bellowing the heirs' names as a battle cry. And the castle itself fought, McGonagall's stone knights in the suits of armor in the very stairs, the building that had opened a hawthorn door for two lonely children, turning every ton of itself against the things that had come to murder them in it. The defenders paid for the ground they held. Harry saw a knot of the D.A., 6th and 7th years he had taught a patroness to in a secret room, hold the foot of the marble stair against a dozen Death Eaters so the wounded could be carried up behind them, and he saw it cost 2 of them, and he saw the rest close the gap and keep standing, because they had decided years ago in that secret room that some things were worth more than their own safety, and they had not changed their minds tonight. Ron and Ginny fought back to back at the heir's flank with the easy lethal coordination of people who had grown up dueling each other in an orchard, and Neville held a doorway with a borrowed sword, and the kind of courage that the world had spent his whole life failing to notice. Every one of them was a door the enemy had come through to reach Harry, exactly as Ron had warned in a hospital corridor, and every one of them stood in their own doorway anyway freely, and the freely was the thing that broke the dark host's heart, because cruelty cannot understand why anyone bleeds for someone else when there is nothing in it for them, and so it never sees the cost of it coming until the cost is standing in its way with a wand and will not move. Bellatrix came for them through the chaos, because she had been sent to finish what Hogsmeade had begun, and this time she did not reach for a portkey. She reached for a killing curse, screaming it at Hermione across the smoking courtyard with all the love-starved hatred of a woman who had given herself entirely to a master who would never love her back, and Harry moved, but he was a half-second too slow, and the half-second was filled, as it had been filled once before on a stair, by someone who chose. Molly Weasley stepped into the curse's path with her wand already answering, and her counter met Bellatrix's killing word in a crash of light that threw them both back. And what followed was not a duel Harry had time to watch, only its end: 2 mothers, one who had buried brothers and one who had buried her own humanity, and the one who still had something to protect proved, as she always proved, the more dangerous, and Bellatrix Lestrange fell at last in the courtyard of the school. And the cold column at the heart of the dark lost its sharpest knife and felt it, and turned its full and final attention to the doors, and to the 2 who blazed before them. He came up the ruined road to the doors alone, because he had spent his servants to bring him here and did not need them for what came next, and the night bent around him, and the snake poured along the broken stone at his side. Harry had seen him in the scar 100 times in the smoke of dreams, but seeing him whole in the world was its own cold thing, the lipless face, the red eyes, the body rebuilt out of theft and ritual into something that wore the shape of a wizard and was, underneath, only the wound a soul leaves when it has been torn 7 times and made to keep walking. "The heirs of Merlin," Voldemort said, and his high cold voice carried over a courtyard gone suddenly quiet, the battle stilling in the way battles still when the thing they are all really about finally arrives. "Children, I have felt you all summer, putting out my candles one by one. Clever children, you have made yourselves the only lock in the world I cannot pick, and so I have come to do the simple thing the clever forget, which is to break the hands instead of the lock." His red gaze moved between them and settled with terrible deliberation on Hermione. "I need only one of you alive to open what waits below. The throne wants 2, but the gate, I think, will settle for 1 heir and the right kind of persuasion. So I will kill the girl, and I will take the surviving heir down into the dark, and by morning the seat of Avalon will have a single soul upon it at last, and it will be mine." "You haven't understood a single thing," Harry said, and his hand found Hermione's, and the light of the seat rose around them both. "You never have. That's the whole of why you lose. You think one of us is the lock and one of us is the spare. There isn't a spare. There was never a spare. Kill either of us and the throne sleeps forever and you get nothing, and you know it, which is why you came yourself instead of sending a curse. You need us both, and you can't have us both, because the thing that makes us worth having is the exact thing you're kind of wanting, destroys the instant it touches it." Voldemort's answer was the killing curse, faster than thought, aimed not at Harry but at Hermione, the move he had announced because announcing it was part of the cruelty, and the 2 as one light caught it and scattered it, but the catching cost them a stagger, a half-second of the world tilting. And in that half-second Voldemort moved to drive a second curse into the gap, the splitting blow, the one that might at last have prized them apart. It did not land because Albus Dumbledore stepped between the heirs and the dark, and met the second curse with the last great working of his life. He had been dying since the autumn, and they had all known it, and Harry understood only in that moment that the old wizard had been saving himself, hoarding the months Severus had bought him, spending nothing, so that on this night, the night it mattered, there would be one final blaze of the wizard who had beaten Grindelwald left in the dying body to give away. He gave it all at once. For a few impossible seconds Albus Dumbledore stood between two children and the most terrible wizard of the age, and was again the greatest of them, his wand a wheel of light, turning aside death after death, buying the heirs the breath they needed to find their feet, and Voldemort, who had feared this one man his whole life, snarled and poured everything into ending him before the moment passed. Harry. Dumbledore did not turn, he could not, holding what he held. His voice came back over his shoulder, steady, almost gentle, under the roar of the duel. Whatever I taught you that was control, forget it tonight. Whatever I taught you that was love, keep. I planned a death for you once, and it was the great sin of my life, and I am so very glad to have lived long enough to make a different one for myself instead. The light at his wand was guttering now, the dying body finally spending the last of what it had. Trust her over me, trust her over everyone. You were right, both of you, from the beginning. The power he knows not was never only your mother's gift, it was the second chair. Go and sit in it and be certain, and do not look back at an old man who is, at last, exactly where he should have stood all along. The last curse broke through, and Albus Dumbledore fell between the enemy and the heirs, his ruined hand outflung toward the doors he had spent the night protecting, and the courtyard let out a sound, the defenders and even some of the dark, because a thing had gone out of the world that the world had organized itself around for a century, and Harry felt the loss tear through him, real and immediate, and could not stop to feel it. Because the old wizard's death had bought a moment, and the moment was already spending itself, and the worst thing he could do to the gift was waste it on grief. The snake struck while the courtyard was still reeling from Dumbledore's fall, pouring off the broken stone toward Harry with all the speed it had used on Arthur, and this time there was a piece of Voldemort's own soul driving it, mad to kill the heir who carried its sibling shard, and Harry could not raise the two as one against it without dropping the light that held Voldemort, and for an instant the whole of the night balanced on the strike of a serpent. It did not reach him. Three of them moved at once, the three who had stood at the heirs' backs for years, and they had clearly planned for exactly this, because Hermione planned for everything and had not failed to plan for the snake. Ginny's curse turned it. Ron's bludgeoning hex pinned its head to the stone. And Neville Longbottom, who had been told all his life that he was the soft one, the forgettable one, the spare, came out of the smoke with a blade in his hands that the castle itself had given him. The sword of Gryffindor risen from the old magic at the heir's need and put into the grip of the bravest hand in reach, and he brought it down on the pinned and thrashing neck of the last loose fragment of Voldemort's soul, and struck the snake's head from its body in a single fall of goblin silver. The thing that came out of the snake as it died was not blood. It was a shred of darkness that shrieked the way the locket had shrieked, the way the book in the library had shrieked years before, the sound of a piece of a torn soul meeting its end, and Harry felt it go through his scar like a sympathetic note struck on a sister string, one more candle out, the next to last, and across the courtyard Voldemort threw back his ruined head and screamed, because he had felt it too, felt a sixth piece of himself torn away and destroyed in front of him. And for the first time that night there was something in the high cold voice that was not contempt or hunger. It was the beginning, the very beginning of mortal fear. 6. Hermione breathed beside Harry, her hand crushing his, her cold map still holding even now. That's 6, Harry, the snake was 6. There's one piece of him left in the whole world. She did not say where, she did not have to. The last shard of Voldemort's soul lived behind the scar on Harry's forehead, and every soul on that ruined field who knew the truth understood, in the sudden silence after the snake's death, that the war had narrowed at last to its final and most terrible point, that there was now exactly one thing standing between the world and the end of Voldemort, and it was a piece of the enemy hidden in the head of the heir they had all come to save. Voldemort's fear lasted only the space of a scream, and then it turned, the way his fear always turned, into something worse, because a creature that has torn its own soul 6 times to escape death does not meet mortality with courage. It meets it with fury. He understood now what every soul on the field understood, that one piece of him remained and that it lived in Harry, and the understanding flipped the whole of his strategy in an instant. He no longer needed both heirs alive to take the gate. He needed Harry dead because Harry's death killed the shard, and a Voldemort who could not take the throne would settle in his rage for being the only torn thing left, for ensuring that if he could not have the seat then the death of the heir would at least make him mortal on his own terms, killed by his own hand, master of his own ending. He raised his wand at Harry with a sound that had no language in it, and the whole broken host turned with him, and for a moment the night gathered itself to fall on one 17-year-old boy. It was the wrong moment to choose, because Harry was not one 17-year-old boy, and never had been. He felt Hermione's decision before she made it. The two of them passed words now, deep in the two as one, and what they did then they did together, the last working of the worst night of the war, and it was not a curse and not a shield, but the thing the seat had been waiting 1,000 years to be allowed to do. They let the land all the way in. They stopped holding the light and became it, and Hogwarts and the forest and the lake and every old stone in Britain that had bowed to them in the Founders' Hall poured its ancient answer up through two joined and marked hands and out across the ruined grounds, not to kill because they would not be murderers even now, but to refuse, an enormous and final refusal, the whole sovereignty of the old world rising to say no to the torn thing that had come to take it. The dark host was lifted off its feet and flung back through the shattered gates like leaves before a door slammed shut. The Dementors burned to nothing, the giants fled, and Voldemort himself, the most terrible wizard of the age, was caught up in the refusal of the land he had thought to rule and hurled back beyond the boundary of the school, his rebuilt body cracking under the strain of it, his certainty broken for the first time since he was a boy in an orphanage deciding the world owed him everything. He did not die, they had known he could not while the shard remained, and the knowing was the bitter price at the bottom of the great working. But he was driven out, broken-bodied and screaming, into the dark of the forest, and the siege of Hogwarts was ended and the castle held. His voice came back across the wrecked grounds one last time before the dark swallowed him, no longer cold and amused but ragged, stripped, a thing that had finally met the limit of what theft and cruelty could buy. "There is one piece of me left," Voldemort screamed to Harry to the whole bleeding field, "and it is in you, boy, in your skull, and you cannot end me without ending it, and you cannot end it without ending yourself. I will come at dawn. Come down to the gate and bring me the shard in your head, or I will spend what is left of me raising every stone and every child in this castle until you do. You have until the sun. Bring me my death, Harry Potter, and let us discover together whether you are willing to die for them, the way the old man raised you to." And then he was gone into the trees, and the silence that came down over Hogwarts was the silence of a battle ended and a war not yet won, and the slow gray beginning of the longest dawn of Harry's life crept up the valley toward a castle full of the dead and the living, and the one impossible thing the two of them would have to attempt before the sun cleared the hills. Morning after the siege was the strangest Harry had ever known, a thing made of grief and survival in equal measure, the castle full of smoke and birdsong at once. They laid the dead in the great hall, under the enchanted ceiling that had gone clear and starlit, as though the castle were trying in the only way it had to give them a sky worth lying under. There were too many. Harry made himself look at all of them now, because the looking he had refused himself in the battle was a debt and he meant to pay it. Colin Creevey, who had been told to leave and had come back with a camera and a borrowed wand. Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks, side by side, who had a son at home who would grow up on the stories of them. A dozen of the Order and 3 of the DA, and others whose names Harry set himself to learn before he let himself rest, because a leader who did not know the names of the people who died for him was exactly the kind of single throne Merlin had built the whole world to prevent. And Albus Dumbledore, laid apart, the ruined hand folded now over the whole one, looking in death less like the greatest wizard of the age, and more like what he had finally allowed himself to become at the end, an old man who had stepped in front of children and stayed there. Harry stood over him for a long moment with grief he did not have time to feel pressing at the back of everything, and found under the grief something he had not expected, which was gratitude and forgiveness, complete and surprising and total. The architect of his death had spent his last breath building a different ending, and had told him, with the curse already taking him, the only instruction that mattered: trust her over me, trust her over everyone. "I do," Harry said quietly to the dead old wizard. "I always did. You taught me that without meaning to, by being the thing I had to learn not to need." He touched the folded hands once. "Thank you for getting there in the end. I'll try to be the kind of two you never got to be." He found the Weasleys after in a corner of the great hall, because he could not have rested until he had counted them, and they were all there, which was a mercy he did not take for granted on a night that had taken so much. Arthur stood with his arm around Molly, who was shaking now that it was over, who had walked through a whole war as a mother defending a kitchen, and had finally, in the courtyard, defended it all the way, and who looked at her own hands as though not certain they were hers. Harry went to her without a word and put his arms around her as she had put hers around him in a hospital wing years before, and held on, and said into her hair the only thing that was true, which was, "You saved her. You saved Hermione. Whatever it cost you, you saved the whole world's chance tonight, because you stood in a doorway like the best of us." Molly held him and wept, and Ginny folded into her father's other side, and Ron stood with one hand on Harry's shoulder and one on his mother's. And for a moment, in a hall full of the dead, the living closed ranks the way the Weasleys had always closed ranks, by simply refusing to leave anyone out, and Harry stood inside the circle of it and understood that this, too, was a thing he was fighting for, and a thing the enemy in the trees had never once had and never would. It was McGonagall who found them after in the alcove behind Marithal, where they had gone because there was nowhere else in the world that was theirs, and the dawn was coming, and they needed, for a quarter of an hour, to be only 2 people and not the last hope of the war. She did not chide them for hiding. She stood in the gap in the tapestry, gray with grief and smoke, the woman who had shielded them since their 2nd year, and she looked at the 2 children she had watched become this, and her voice when it came was not steady. "He left you the school," she said. "Albus, in a letter weeks ago to me with instructions. He said when the time came I was to stop trying to protect you and start following you, and that it would be the hardest thing he ever asked of me and the most important." She drew herself up. So I am asking Potter Granger not as your teacher, as your subject if that is the word and I find that it is. The castle is yours, the people who are left are yours. Tell me what you mean to do and I will see it done, or I will die seeing it done, and there is no one left now with the standing to tell either of us no. So they told her, the two of them, sitting in the alcove with the blue cup and the white one cold and unfilled because there was no time for tea, and the telling was the first time they had said the whole of the plan aloud to anyone but Merlin's portrait and a dying headmaster. At dawn they would go down, not out to Voldemort where he wanted them, but down below the Hollow King's library to Avalon's gate, the deepest threshold, the most awake stone in Britain, the one place where the two as one ran strongest. And there on the ground that loved them, they would do the thing that had never been done. They would sever the last shard of Voldemort's soul from Harry's, with Hermione holding him to life across the wound of it, and when it was severed and destroyed, Voldemort would be mortal at last, a single torn soul in a failing stolen body, and they would come up out of the deep and end him, the way you end any mortal thing together. And if it fails, McGonagall said. She did not flinch from it, she had never flinched from anything. If the severance kills him, say it, I will not follow a plan I have not been told the cost of. Then I die, Harry said, and the shard dies with me and Voldemort becomes mortal anyway, and Hermione finishes it without me because she's the cleverest and the fiercest and the best of all of us and she will not let him win even over my body. That's the floor of it. Even the worst version ends with him ended. He took Hermione's hand on the table, roots to wings, and did not look away from his old teacher. But it's not going to fail. Everyone keeps planning for the version where I'm alone, where there's one of me walking into the dark to die. There isn't one of me. There hasn't been since I was 13. That's the whole thing none of them ever understood, and it's the thing that's going to bring me back. McGonagall left them to ready the castle, because there were the living to see to and the dead to guard and a dawn to hold against, and for a few minutes more Harry and Hermione had the alcove to themselves, the last quiet either of them might ever be given, and they spent it the way they had spent the first night of all of this, sitting close on the window seat where a candle had once flared, not talking, letting the silence catch up. I worked the severance through again, Hermione said finally, while McGonagall was talking every step of it. I've worked it through 900 times and it's the same every time and I keep doing it because the working is the only thing that holds the fear still. Her thumb moved over the silver roots on the back of his hand. There's a moment in it, Harry, right at the center, where the shard is cut loose and you're, for an instant, not anchored to anything. Not to the shard, not to your body, not to the world. A heartbeat where you're nowhere, and the whole of it, the entire plan, the thing we've staked everything on, comes down to whether in that heartbeat you can find your way back along the one thread that's still attached. She looked up at him, and there was no cold map in her face now, only the truth under it that the map had always been built to protect. I'm the thread, that's my whole job. To be so unmistakably here, so loud, so impossible to lose, that even with no body and no anchor and a piece of your soul being torn away, you turn toward me out of habit, the way you've turned toward me since the troll, and follow me home. Her voice did not break, quite. So I need you to promise me one thing, not to be brave. You're always brave, it's the least useful thing about you. I need you to promise that in that heartbeat where you're nowhere, you won't do the noble thing and let go to make it safe. You'll be selfish, you'll reach for me, you'll come back, promise me you'll come back. I promise, Harry said. It was the easiest promise he had ever made, and he understood why as he made it, that he had been practicing it his whole life, that every doorway he had ever stood in had been practiced for the one moment when the order would reverse, and she would be the one holding the line and he would be the one finding the way through. I've spent 5 years learning to feel where you are across a castle, across a battlefield, across a smoking library. A heartbeat of nowhere isn't going to be enough to lose you in. You're the loudest thing in my world, Hermione. You have been since you read me a footnote about a man whose portrait walked away. He turned his hand under hers, palm to palm, roots to wings, the oldest gesture they had. When it's over, the thing I didn't finish saying on this seat a year ago. When it's over and we're both still here, I'm going to finish it. That's the other reason I'm coming back. I refuse to die with the most important sentence of my life still half said. Hermione made a sound that was a laugh and was not, and pressed her forehead to his, as she did when the words ran out, and they sat like that, 17 and of age and out of time, in the only place that had ever been wholly theirs, while the grey dawn climbed toward a castle of the dead, and a torn soul waited in the trees, and the deepest stone in Britain hummed below them, ready, patient, certain. The way it had been certain since the night it opened a hawthorn door for two lonely children who had reached for each other instead of a throne. Mind and heart, she whispered. Mind and heart, said Harry, and they rose and laced their marked hands together and went down through the waking castle toward Avalon's gate and the last morning of the war and the impossible thing that only two who were one had ever had any hope of doing. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The true heirs. Avalon's gate lay below the Hollow King's library the way the root lies below the tree, and they had only seen it once before, on the night they first dared the lower stair, and had come straight back up because the place had frightened even Hermione into silence. It frightened Harry still. It was a round chamber, vast, hewn from a single stone, older than the castle and older than the country, and there was no fire in it and no light but the light the marks under their own skins gave off, and at its center there was no throne and no door, only a perfect circle of black water, still as glass, that did not reflect them when they stood at its edge. This was the gate, not a thing you walked through. A threshold to the whole of Merlin's deepest legacy, the place where the two as one ran nearest to the surface of the world, and the place Merlin's portrait had told them in the dark before they descended, where a thing that had never been done might, by two who were certain, be done. "He'll feel us start," Hermione said. Her voice did not echo. The chamber drank sound the way the water drank light. "The moment we open the severance, the shard in your scar is going to scream to him, and he's going to come down here as fast as that ruined body can carry him, because the one thing he cannot allow is for us to take the last piece of him out of you cleanly. So we don't have long. We do the severance, we get you back, and we're standing and whole when he comes through that stair, or we don't get to do the second part at all." She knelt at the edge of the black water and drew him down beside her, and for a moment she was not the heir of Merlin or the cold map of the war, but only Hermione, 17, terrified, holding both his hands at the lip of a thing that might take him from her. "Last chance to think of a better plan." "There isn't one," Harry said. "There never was. There was always only this, the two of us, doing the impossible thing because we're the only two it's possible for. You knew that on a window seat when we were 13. He pressed his forehead to hers, the gesture that had become their word for the things too large for words. "I'm going to come back. Say it with me so the chamber hears it, and so you do." "You're going to come back," Hermione said. "We don't do the safe version," said Harry. "Mind and heart. Now hold the line and I'll find the way through, and then for once in our lives we'll have got the order exactly right." They lowered their joined hands into the black water of Avalon's gate, and the severance began. Harry had been inside the two as one 1,000 times, but never like this, because every other time it had reached outward into a door, a wall, a battlefield, the land. Now it turned inward into him, into the oldest wound he carried, and he felt Hermione come with it, felt her pour herself along the thread of their joined hands and into the dark behind his scar where the shard had lived since before he could remember, and he felt the shard wake and know what was coming and begin in the high cold register he had heard his whole life in his nightmares to scream. It fought. Of course it fought. It was a piece of the thing that fought death harder than anything that had ever lived. It threw at him every weapon it had spent 16 years sharpening from the inside, every doubt, every loneliness, the cupboard, the green light, the voice that had told him he was nothing, and the other voice that had told him he was a freak, and the worst voice of all, his own in the small hours, asking whether any of them had been wrong. And under all of it, the shard did the thing it had been built to do, the thing the book in the library had tried, and the locket had tried, and the cup had tried. It offered him the kingdom of one. It showed him that he could keep it, that he need not be severed at all. That the power in his scar could be his, made his, the dark and the light together in one unbroken sovereign soul that needed no second chair and no held line and no girl with a chipped blue cup to make it whole, because it would already be whole, alone, forever, untouchable, safe. And Harry, 17 years old, with a piece of the most terrible wizard in the world screaming inside his skull and offering him everything, did the thing he had done in a hall when he was 13 and had done every day since and would do, he understood now, for the rest of whatever life this bought him. He said no, not without her. And he let the severance take the shard, and the shard came loose, and for one heartbeat Harry Potter was nowhere. There are no words for the nowhere, and Hermione had been right that it could not be planned for, only survived. The shard was gone and his body was a great distance away, and the world was a rumor, and there was nothing to hold to, no up, no self, no edge where Harry stopped and the dark began, only the vast and patient pull of the unanchored toward the easy peace of simply letting go, of dissolving, of being done. It would have been so easy. It was the easiest thing the universe had ever offered him. And in the center of the nowhere, where there should have been nothing, there was one thread, fine as the silver under his skin, bright as a candle flaring on a window seat, and along the thread there came a voice he would have followed out of any dark that was ever made. A voice reading him a footnote, a voice saying, "I'll figure it out, you hold the line," a voice saying mind and heart, a voice that was simply, impossibly, unmistakably here, and would not stop being here and would not let him go. He reached for it. He turned in the nowhere as he had turned toward her across 100 rooms and a smoking library in a burning village, the oldest habit he had, the truest, and he followed the thread of her home. The world rushed back. He was on his knees at the edge of the black water, with Hermione's hands crushing his and her face an inch from his and tears pouring down it, and her voice still saying his name like an incantation. And behind his scar, for the first time since he was 15 months old, there was nothing, no wound, no whisper, no second self, only Harry, whole and severed and alive and entirely his own. The shard rose out of the black water of the gate as the two as one cast it out, a writhing knot of darkness, the last seventh of Voldemort's torn soul, and it had nowhere to go, no body to flee to, no master near enough to take it in, and the old whole soul magic of Avalon held it in the air over the still water and unmade it. and it screamed the way they had all screamed, the book and the locket and the cup and the snake. The sound of a piece of a torn thing meeting the one force in the world it could not survive, and then it was gone, burned out of existence by the magic of two who were one, and the chamber was silent, and Harry was breathing, and there were 6 pieces of Voldemort's soul destroyed, and the 7th gone, and only the original remained in the failing stolen body, mortal at last. "You came back," Hermione said over and over, her forehead against his, both of them shaking. You came back, you selfish, wonderful idiot, you came back. You were so loud," Harry said, and laughed, wet and wrecked and alive. "You were the loudest thing in the dark, I told you. I could never lose you in a single heartbeat, not in 1,000 of them." They had no time to rest in it, because the stair was already filling with cold. He came down into Avalon's gate the way a storm comes down a valley, and the ruined, stolen body could barely hold him now, the rebuilt flesh cracked and graying, one hand pressed to his own chest as though he could feel the place where the last shard had been torn out of the world, and the wholeness of his death come rushing in to fill it. But the red eyes still burned, and the wand was still in his hand, and the hatred had not lessened. If anything, it had become the only thing holding the failing body upright, a torn soul running on nothing but its refusal to end. "What have you done?" Voldemort said, and the high cold voice had a crack in it now, a mortal crack. "I felt it, the last of it. You have torn it out of you and destroyed it, and now I am—" He stopped, because saying the word was beyond even him. Mortal. He was mortal for the first time since he was a boy in an orphanage who had decided he would never die, and some animal part of the thing he had become understood it before his pride would let the rest of him admit it. His gaze went past the two of them, to the still black circle of the gate, to the threshold of the deepest power in Britain, the throne he had come for, the sovereignty that could make even a mortal man a god. "No matter," he said, and the crack in his voice sealed over with a terrible new certainty. "No matter, I do not need the soul anchors if I have the seat itself. It made you what you are, it will make me more. I will take the gate here now with my own hand and let it pour its 1,000 years into me, and your severance will not matter, and your love will not matter, and your throne will at last have the master it was always meant for." "Don't," Harry said, and he was on his feet now, and Hermione beside him, and the warning in his voice was real, because he had read the inscription when he was 13, and he knew with a cold finality exactly what was about to happen. "Don't touch it. You don't understand what it is. It isn't power you take. It's a thing you hold, and you can only hold it with what?" Voldemort spat. "With love, with a second chair. Spare me the children's catechism." And he crossed to the edge of the black water, and he reached out his cracked gray hand, and he laid it upon the threshold of Avalon's gate to take by force the one power in the world that had ever frightened him, the single soul reaching at last for the thing that wanted to. The gate answered him. It answered him the way it had been built to answer, the way Merlin had designed it across 1,000 years of patient dread, the way the inscription on the floor of a hidden hall had promised it would. The whole soul magic of Avalon, the wholeness that two who were one had poured into it all their lives, rushed up to meet the hand that grasped it, and it sought, the way it had always sought, for the wholeness in the soul that reached for it, the second chair, the held line, the thing that made the holding safe. And in Voldemort it found nothing. It found a soul torn 7 times and scattered, and now stripped back to a single starving remnant, a thing that had spent its whole existence making itself less, dividing itself against death until there was no wholeness left anywhere in it for the magic to answer. And the old power of the seat, finding nothing to hold and nowhere to rest and no second soul to make it safe, did the only thing it could do to a single soul that grasped what wanted for two. It burned him hollow. Harry watched it happen and would never quite find the words for it, though he tried in the years after for the people who needed to understand. The power did not strike Voldemort down. It poured into him, all of it, the 1,000 years, the sovereignty, the wholeness, exactly as he had demanded, and it found him too small and too torn to contain a thing built for two, and it filled the great cracked emptiness where 6/7 of a soul used to be, and the emptiness could not hold it, and so the emptiness consumed him from the inside the way a candle flame consumes the dark by becoming it. He had time for one sound. It was not a scream of pain. It was, Harry thought afterward, the worst sound he had ever heard, precisely because it was not pain, it was understanding. In the last instant of his existence, Lord Voldemort finally understood the thing the prophecy had promised, and he had never once been able to grasp, the power he knew not, that the throne he had reached for his whole life could only ever be held by the one thing he had destroyed in himself before he was 17, and that he had spent his immortality making himself into the precise shape of the soul that the oldest magic in Britain was built to burn. And then the light folded back down into the still black water of the gate, and where the most terrible wizard of the age had stood there was nothing at all, not a body, not ash, only a torn soul's worth of empty air closing over a place where a man had refused for 80 years to ever be one of two. It was over. After 1,000 years of waiting and 7 years of war and a night of the dead, it was simply quietly over, and the chamber was silent, and the two of them stood at the edge of Avalon's gate, whole alive together, and held on to each other and did not speak, because some endings are too large for sound and can only be survived the way they had survived everything, hand in the dark, two who were one. They climbed up out of Avalon's gate as the sun cleared the hills, and the light that came through the broken windows of Hogwarts was the ordinary gold of any morning, which seemed, after the night, like the most extraordinary thing Harry had ever seen. The defenders were waiting at the top of the stair, McGonagall at their head, and they had felt it, the way the whole of magical Britain had felt the Convocation wake 2 years before. Every wand in the castle had gone cold and then warm again in the instant of Voldemort's unmaking, and they had known, before Harry said a word, that the long dark was over. He said it anyway, because they had earned the plain words. "He's gone," Harry said, standing in the dawn with Hermione's hand in his and the mark quiet under his skin for the first time he could remember, with nothing hidden behind his scar. All of him, "It's finished, we're free." The sound the castle made then was not a cheer, not at first. It was the sound a held breath makes when it is finally let go, a great ragged exhalation of grief and relief together, because there were too many dead in the great hall for simple joy, and the people who had survived into a morning their friends would never see. But under the grief the joy came anyway, slow and disbelieving and then unstoppable, and Harry stood in the middle of it as the people he loved closed around the two of them, Ron and Ginny and a weeping Molly and a steady Arthur and Neville still holding the sword and Luna with her serene impossible smile, and he let himself, for the first time in 7 years, be held by a future instead of braced against one. He went to the headmaster's office that evening alone but for Hermione, because he never did anything that mattered without her, and on the wall behind the great desk, among the slumbering portraits of 100 dead headmasters, there was a new frame, and in it Albus Dumbledore sat in his painted chair with his hands folded and his blue eyes open and waiting, and there were no instruments to manage now and no cards beneath the table and nothing left to steer. "It is done, then," the portrait said. It was the same voice, and it was different, lighter, a weight set down. "I felt the castle change. I confess I have spent the day in a state I am not accustomed to, which is having nothing left to worry about." The painted eyes moved over the two of them, the marks, the joined hands, the particular way they stood that had become, over 7 years, a single shape. "You did it the way I could never have done it, together and certain, and unwilling to the last to let either one of you bear it alone. I spent a lifetime believing the heaviest things must be carried by the strongest person in secret for the good of all, and I was wrong in a way that cost a great many people a great deal, and it took 2 children to teach me, at the very end, the thing my own dead sister had been trying to teach me when I was younger than you are now. That power kept secret and born alone curdles, however good the bearer, and that the only safe way to hold a terrible thing is in the open, in trust, with someone who is allowed to tell you no." He inclined his painted head. "Thank you for letting me die having learned it. It is more than I deserved, and I find I am not too proud any longer to be grateful for more than I deserved." "You stepped in front of us," Harry said. "At the end, the architect of my death died keeping me alive. Whatever you got wrong, sir, you got the last thing right, and I'm not going to spend the rest of my life remembering you by the worst of your plans. I'm going to remember you by where you chose to stand when it mattered." "That," Dumbledore said, and his painted voice was not quite steady, "is a kinder epitaph than I would have written for myself, and I have decided, on the strength of a long life's evidence, to trust the two of you over my own judgment in all things, and so I shall accept it. Go on, both of you. There is a world up there that has just discovered it is free and has not the faintest idea what to do about it, and it is, I am very much afraid, your world now. Try to be gentler with it than I was. You already are." The world did not, in fact, have the faintest idea what to do about its freedom, and for a few weeks it looked to the two of them to do it for them, which was the oldest and most dangerous temptation of all, the one Merlin had built a 1,000-year lock to prevent, and Harry understood why the old king had been so frightened of his own throne the morning the Wizengamot sent its trembling delegation to Hogwarts to offer the heirs, in so many words, the rule of magical Britain. They convened the convocation one last time to refuse it. They did it in the Founders' Hall, where the 2 stone seats still stood and would always stand, and the whole of magical Britain felt the call in their wands and came, in presence if not in body, the bound and the free, the old families gone suddenly humble and the Muggleborn who had written letters 2 years before, and the goblins and the centaurs and the creatures who had never once been asked to a human council, and were asked now. And Hermione, standing before the assembled country with Harry's hand in hers, gave the speech that the histories would spend the next century arguing about and the next millennium getting right, and the whole of it could be put in the thing she said at the end. "You want us to rule you," she said, "because you are frightened and you have just learned how terrible the world can be, and a single strong hand feels like safety when you are frightened. We understand that better than anyone alive. We were offered a kingdom of one when we were 13, and we have been offered it by something or someone every year since, and the last person who reached for it with a single hand is a torn soul's worth of empty air at the bottom of this castle. So hear us and write it down, because we will only say it once and we will hold the whole of you to it forever. We will not rule you. The seat was built so that no two souls could be trusted with that, including us, especially us. We will not be your kings. She let the dismay move through the hall, and then she gave them the thing that was better than a king, the thing Merlin had built the seat to make possible and never quite dared to use it for. What we will be, Hermione said, is the floor beneath you that cannot be moved. We will convene this convocation, and we will bind into the oldest law in Britain a single principle, older than your ministry and higher than your Wisengamot and beyond the reach of any gold or any fear, and the principle is this. No soul born with magic is worth less than any other for the blood it was born to, not the Muggle-born, not the half-blood. Not the goblin, nor the centaur, nor the elf, nor any thinking creature that the old families spent 1,000 years deciding were beasts because it was profitable to. The land has weighed that question in this hall twice now, and the land's answer is bound and final, and we are only here to make sure no one is ever again powerful enough to unmake it in a back room. Govern yourselves, argue and vote and get it wrong and fix it, the way free people do. But you will do it on a floor that we will hold beneath the smallest of you with the whole authority of Merlin's throne, and if any power in Britain ever again tries to decide that some children are too low-born to exist, they will find that the floor has teeth, and that the heirs of Merlin are standing on it, and that we have never once been afraid of the people with the gold. It was the creatures who answered first, which the histories would also argue about, because no human council had ever once given them a voice, and they were not in the habit of expecting one. Ragnarok, keeper of the deep ledgers, who had come up from the lower vaults a second time in his long life to stand at this convocation, inclined his ancient head a fraction of an inch, which from a goblin was the bow a king gives an equal, and said only, "The ledgers will record that the heirs of Merlin laid a floor and did not climb onto it. We are older than your enemies, children, and we have watched a great many of your kind take thrones. You are the first we have watched refuse one. The goblin nation will remember it, which is a thing we do not say lightly, for we remember everything and forgive almost none of it." And out beyond the high windows, on the dark edge of the forest, the centaurs who had broken 1,000 years of holding apart to fight a human war stood in a long silent line under the stars and watched the hall blaze with the old light, and did not come in because they were centaurs and would always keep their own counsel, but did not leave either, which from the herd was a treaty more binding than any ink. The floor Hermione had laid was wide, wider than any law in the history of magical Britain, and it had been built, the creatures understood before the wizards did, by two people who knew exactly what it was to be told you were worth less, and had decided to spend the highest power in the world making sure no one was ever told it again. It was, the prophet wrote the next morning, the strangest seizure of power in the history of magical Britain, because it was a seizure of power whose entire content was a refusal to use it for anything but the protection of the powerless. The old families raged, in the safe, quiet way of people who have just discovered the ground has shifted under them, and dare not say so too loudly. And in a flat in Manchester, a mother read the bound decree to a Muggle-born daughter who would never now be turned away from anything for the blood in her veins. And somewhere a second-year named Dennis, who had once stopped telling anyone when he was hexed for his blood, read it too, and understood that the land itself had his back, and stood, that morning, a little straighter, which was the only kind of victory Harry had ever actually wanted. The kind that let the smallest of them stop hiding in the dark. There were the dead to honor first, and Harry would not let the joy of the ending rush past them, because a victory that forgot its cost was the first step back toward the kind of power that spent people like coin. They held the remembrance in the great hall under the open ceiling, and Harry and Hermione spoke the names themselves, all of them, every one, because they had learned the names in the days after the battle exactly so that they could. The Order dead, and the D.A. dead, and Colin Creevey who had crept back with a camera, and Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks whose son would grow up on the stories, and Albus Dumbledore who had got the last thing right. They did not make it grand. Hermione had been fierce about that. No statues, she said. No gold. Gold and statues are how the powerful make the dead into a thing they own. We say the names, and we say them plain, and we make sure the world they died for is one they'd have wanted, and that's the only monument that doesn't curdle. So they said the names plain, and the hall wept, and then, because resilience was the only proper answer to grief that Harry had ever found, they did the thing the dead would have wanted, which was to live. They rebuilt. They laughed again, slowly, guiltily, and then without guilt. Molly Weasley's kitchen filled back up with noise. Hagrid replanted his garden. The first years who came in September would never know the danger had been there, and that not knowing was the truest memorial of all, a world so safe for the smallest of them that they could not imagine it had ever been otherwise. Harry stood at the back of the remembrance with Hermione's hand in his, and understood that this was the resilience Merlin had been betting on across 1,000 years, not the strength to take a throne, but the stubborner and gentler strength to bury your dead and plant a garden and let one more frightened child in out of the dark, over and over, until the kindness outlasted the cruelty by simple refusal to stop. It was high summer before the world let them go, before the funerals were all said and the rebuilding begun and the convocation's floor laid so deep that even the old families had stopped testing it. And when the world finally did let them go, Harry found Hermione on a warm gold evening exactly where the whole of it had started, on the window seat behind the tapestry of Merithil the patient, with the chipped blue cup steaming in her hands. She had filled the white one for him as she had for 7 years, and he climbed in behind the tapestry, and Merithil gave the two newly uncrowned saviors of magical Britain the same long-suffering patience she had given a lonely 12-year-old setting out a candle, and that more than any decree or any throne felt to Harry like coming home. The lake had gone the color of pewter through the window, the way it had on the first night. A first-year shouted somewhere on the grounds and was swallowed by the warm dark. Everything was the same and nothing was, and between them on the seat there was no war any more, only the thing they had kept rooting in the dark for 5 years because the timing was always wrong, and the timing at last after everything was not wrong any more. "You owe me a sentence," Hermione said. She said it lightly, but her hand was not quite steady on the blue cup, and she had brought, he saw, the green cup too and Ginny's, and set them in the row even though their owners were 2 floors up, because there were more than 2 of them in everything now and the table would always admit it, and that was so entirely Hermione that he loved her past the edge of what he could hold. "You said it twice. On this seat when we were 16, and at the gate, with a piece of Voldemort screaming in your head, you said when it's over you'd finish the most important sentence of your life. Well," she turned to him and the cleverness was in her face and under it, for once no map at all, only a girl who had read him a footnote about a man whose portrait walked away and never once in 7 years walked away from him. "It's over, we're both still here, you're out of war, you're out of excuses. And I have waited, Harry James Potter, with more patience than I have ever shown anything in my life, and I am done waiting. Finish your sentence." Harry set down the white cup. He took the blue one gently out of her hands and set it down too, so that there was nothing between them, and he took both her hands, wing veins under his thumbs, roots under hers, the oldest gesture they had and the truest, and he looked at the girl who had been his mind and his home and his whole found family rolled into one frizzy-haired, fearless person since he was 11 years old and certain he belonged nowhere, and he finished it. "There should be a word," he said. "You told me that on this seat the night the candle flared. Best friend isn't big enough, you said, and there should be a word, and I gave you mind and heart, and it was true, and it was never the whole of it, and it hasn't been since I don't even know when, since before I was brave enough to notice. So here's the whole of it. The word is you. It's been you the entire time. I love you, Hermione, not the way you love the person who stands in your doorway. The way you love the person you'd walk back out of nowhere for, the person whose voice is the loudest thing in any dark that was ever made, the person I'd refuse every kingdom in every world to sit in one plain chair beside. I have loved you since before I had a word for it, and now there's a word, and the word is you, and I'm never going to stop saying it. That's the sentence. That's the whole of the sentence I've been trying to finish since I was 13. Hermione did not say anything clever. That was how he knew, more than anything, what it meant to her. That for once in her brilliant life she had no words ready, only tears standing in her eyes and a smile breaking across her face like the sun clearing the hills over Avalon's gate. And she leaned in and he met her. And on the window seat where a 1,000-year legacy had once woken for 2 lonely children who reached for each other instead of a throne, Harry Potter and Hermione Granger finally, gently, of age and unafraid and entirely certain, kissed, and the candle on the sill, which he had not lit, flared white at the wick all on its own, throwing their 2 shadows enormous and joined up the curved wall of the dead stairwell, and neither of them noticed because they had found at last the only magic either of them had ever really been looking for. When they parted, her forehead came to rest against his, the way it always had, the word for the things too large for words. "Mind and heart," Hermione whispered, and it meant everything it had ever meant, and now it meant this too, and would mean it for the rest of their lives. "Mind and heart," said Harry, and kissed her again because he could, because the war was over and the floor was laid and the world was free, and there was nothing left in the whole of it that could keep him from her, and there never would be again. They told the others that night in the Burrows kitchen, which had become the center of the found family the way kitchens always did, the warm, loud heart of a house that had survived a war with all its people. They did not have to say much. Ginny took one look at the 2 of them coming through the door hand in hand with that particular new ease about them, and let out a whoop that brought Mrs. Weasley in from the garden, and Ron looked at his 2 best friends and rolled his eyes so hard it nearly took his whole head with it and said, "Oh, finally, you absolute pair of disasters. I have been waiting since 4th year. The entire war I kept thinking, if one of them dies before they sort this out, I will personally haunt the survivor." And then he hugged them both at once, hard, the scar on his shoulder pulling, the best spare in Britain who had been right about everything that mattered since a corridor and a green cup. Mrs. Weasley cried, of course, and fed them, of course, and somewhere in the warm chaos of it, Harry stood with his back to the familiar wall and watched the people he loved fill a kitchen with the ordinary noise of being alive. And he thought about a boy in a cupboard who had been certain he belonged nowhere, and he understood that the cupboard boy had been wrong, not because the world had handed him a throne, but because it had handed him these, a girl with a chipped blue cup. A friend who threw himself in front of curses, a red-headed family who had claimed him by simply refusing to leave him out, a stern old teacher who had chosen to follow them, a dead headmaster who had got the last thing right. The throne had never been the point. The throne had been the danger the whole story was built to survive. The point had always been the kitchen and the people in it, and the warmth that kept getting larger because someone kept deciding to let one more person in. The school was rebuilt by September, because a castle that had stood 1,000 years and woken to defend 2 children did not intend to be kept down by one bad night, and Minerva McGonagall stood at the doors as headmistress to welcome the new first years, the woman who had shielded 2 of her students since their second year and learned at the end to follow them. Among the frightened 11-year-olds filing in under the autumn sky, there were Muggle-borns who would never know, because they were too young to remember the before, that there had ever been a world where the blood in their veins could have been used to decide they were worth less. That was the victory, that the children would not remember the danger because the danger had been bound into the floor beneath them by 2 people who had refused to be kings. Harry thought Merlin would have understood it. He thought from the piece on the old painted face the last time he had visited the Hollow King's library that Merlin already had. Draco Malfoy did not come back to finish his schooling, and Harry did not blame him. A person who has watched a war from the inside of the wrong house needs a long, quiet while to learn who he is without the script. But a letter came that autumn, short and stiff and unsigned in any way that could be used against its writer, and it said only, "My mother is safe. We are somewhere the old names cannot reach us. I am told the floor you laid covers even the children of the families who fed the dark, which I did not expect and have not finished thinking about. Tell Granger she was right in the corridor all those years ago. I find I am still not able to say more than that, and I find also that it is the truest thing I have ever written." Harry read it twice and put it with the other letters Hermione kept, the grandfathers and the mothers from Manchester, the small evidences that the slow defection of the people the dark had been so sure it owned was a kind of magic too, and that they had won it not by force but by laying a floor wide enough to catch even the ones who had been told their whole lives they were too good to stand on it. And on the first cold evening of the new term, when the castle had settled and the first years were asleep and the war was a year and a season behind them, Harry slipped behind the tapestry of Marithel the patient and found Hermione already there, as she always was, as she always would be, with the kettle steaming in the blue cup and the white one set out and the candle she had not lit waiting on the sill. Marithel watched him in with her long patience. Outside, the lake had gone to pewter, and the dark was coming down soft and ordinary over a free and rebuilt world. He climbed onto the window seat beside the girl who had read him a footnote when they were children and become, across 7 years and a 1,000-year throne and the longest dark either of them would ever know, his equal, his partner, his family, his whole heart and the better half of his mind, and he took her hand, roots reaching for wings, and the silver under their skin woke and shone, the way it had on a hawthorn door, the way it would for the rest of their lives. "Mind and heart," Hermione said, and lifted the blue cup, and the candle on the sill flared white all on its own, and lit the 2 of them together, certain home, in the warm little room that had only ever belonged to the 2 of them and now never would belong to anyone else. Chapter 7 End.